Let's get peppy! Welcome to PEP 202. This is PEP or Planet Extra podcast. I'm the host of Planet America on ABC Australia, but this is not an official podcast of the ABC's. Repeat, not an official podcast. But on PEP, we do cover all the stuff that's too nerdy for TV. If you're listening, you can find us on YouTube at the PEP with Chaz and Dr. Dave channel, and you can also see highlights on the PEP Clips YouTube channel, which we haven't serviced for a while, Lockie. We should get back onto that one. You will also find timestamps and show notes in our blurb. And if you leave a comment under our current episode video, we are likely to see it. You can also tweet us or blue sky us at PEPCHASDRDAVE. That's at Pep Chaz Dr. Dave. If you want to chat to some fellow peppers, you can join our Discord server. It's on the screen now or in the blurb of the podcast. But if you want to contact me or Lockie the Lucky privately, why not email us? The address is producer@pepthepodcast.com. Again, it's producer@pepthepodcast.com, and I have started replying. I replied to about 100 emails this week, so there you go. But for now, let's turn to the lady who will never raise the stakes on inconsequential views. I'm talking about the biggest star on the show that shan't be named. It's Melina Wicks.
Hello.
Hello, Melina.
Hi.
How you going there?
Pretty good.
Yeah. What are you grateful for, Melina?
I'm grateful for something that, look, some people might really hate this, but, each to their own. I've noticed that increasingly news organizations have started putting out audio versions of their articles.
Yeah.
And also, actually, you can, on an iPhone at least, get an automatic readout of a page as well. Sometimes they're AI generated, sometimes they have people read them depending on the quality and stuff. But I have to read a lot of material for my work on the show that will not be named. And in particular, because my segment is a deep dive on a particular topic, it means I spend a lot of time reading about something very specific while still trying to keep across the news in general, because I need to know what's going on to be able to pick the topics and also to come on here. And so it means that sometimes, especially like longer form articles on things that are topical, or even longer form articles on things that are not so topical, it's just really hard to find the time to read that when I'm doing a ton of reading. And so sometimes those audio versions, the difference between me being able to consume something or not, because I can put it on while I'm walking to work, and it's a little extra thing. And an example from a little while back, but where I found it really helpful, was there was a New Yorker profile on Lauren Boebert, and it was like an hour long, because it's one of those long reads, and I thought, this isn't what I'm looking into at the moment. I don't really have time to read this while I'm also just amongst all the general reading. But they had an audio version, and I was interested enough, so I listened to it, and they had a detail in it about everyone at this sort of town hall for the candidates for her congressional district being asked, put your hand up if you have a criminal record, and that 6 out of the 9 people put their hands up. And that was just something about Lauren Boebert, but I happened to be writing a piece about how many Americans have criminal records. I thought that sounds like great footage, so I went and dug it up on YouTube and used it in the piece. And that's just something I wouldn't have come across if I wasn't able to get extra news content consuming time out of these audio options. They're not good for everything. So, for example, one of our favorite columnists, Nick Catoggio, has a lot of links in his pieces. I wouldn't listen to an audio version of his, because a lot of the time he's kind of referencing something kind of obliquely with a link. You really have to look at the link to understand what he's talking about. So it's not good for everything. Some people might hate them in general. I don't think it's better than reading the article. I do absorb information better when I read it. But just as another option to help me consume some of the articles that I would not get to otherwise, I'm grateful for it, because it just means that I can enjoy some of those long form pieces that I really like that I would find it hard to find the time for otherwise. So I'm grateful for that.
It's really nice. I presume they're AI read?
It's a mix. So mostly AI read, but some, like New Yorker and New York Times, will sometimes, for like kind of particular high profile pieces, they will get someone to read it. New Yorker even does one once a week where they pick like a kind of feature story and they get the author to introduce it before they have someone read it, and they give a little bit of extra context too, which is really nice. But yeah, the bulk of them are AI. Some of them are not, but generally the quality is quite good even for the AI ones. Like you know, every once in a while there's like a slight quirk of pronunciation, but like you understand what they're saying always. So yeah, it sounds like someone talking. It doesn't sound like some disjointed robot. So it's quite handy.
They get the enunciation right.
Yeah,
and stuff.
yeah.
That's good. I actually often with the gratefuls, I'll just, you guys know what I do. I smuggle in a story I can't fit in somewhere else. That's what I do. Often. But every now and then I actually reveal an embarrassing slice of my personality by telling you what I'm actually grateful for. And what I'm actually grateful for at the moment, this is a real embarrassing one. Whenever I get into my YouTube habits, I know people pay attention because I see comments about them months later. I'm still getting comments about chiropractor videos because I mentioned halfway through last year that my YouTube algorithm is filled with chiropractor videos. And that is true. That is true. I like watching people getting cracked. But there's another thing that my YouTube algorithm is now filled with. This is basically my last 3 weeks. As we get closer and closer to the holidays and my concentration is getting worse and worse, more and more of my computer time is being filled with me playing the numbers game from Countdown. Do you know the game show Countdown? The British game show? It's the one that Letters and Numbers is based on.
Right.
Yeah. I'm not so much. I mean, I can do the letters, but I'm not so much into the letters. I'm into the numbers. I'm really into the numbers. I'm a maths nerd from way back. And look, I'm no Rachel Riley, but I hold my own, shall we say, with the numbers. And that's how I do to relax. I'll just fly through because there's a guy called Bjorn something or other who's got literally every single numbers game from every single day online on his YouTube channel. I don't know why he does that, but thank you, Bjorn. I'm grateful to you and also a little bit ashamed. I mean, I do them fast, right? So I'll just do them for 5 seconds or 10 seconds and I'll move on to the next one. But I'll do 50 in a row. Like I'll do a lot in a row. And the worse my concentration is, the more I'll do in a row. Yes, and it really does. It makes my brain tingle. I love it. So thank you very much, Bjorn. Thank you very much, Countdown, and thank you very much, Rachel Riley, for giving me the answers when I can't think of them. It's that is a very unfortunate slice of my actual life. What I do for a good time, but now it's time to straighten up with. Hey! Correspondence Central. Correspondence Central. Okay, now it's become apparent to me that the video game chat is going to last forever if I don't stop it. because every single week we get more, not just extra correspondence, but increasing amounts of correspondence.
This is novelty songs all over again.
It is. It really is. It really is. So I'm not going to read everyone's video game thoughts, even though, look, they're great. They're great. And people have been really nice to me because, basically universally when people write to us about the video games, they're trying to say that I've got no idea. And that's cool. That's cool. I accept that. I'm not disputing it. There's no argument from me on that. But they're really nice to me about it because they treat me like the grandparent I am to them, and I mean very gentle. But what I am going to do now with correspondence is I'm not going to go through the arguments, even though they are great arguments, because I just don't want this to keep on going. I am going to tell you about the games that these people have mentioned in their passing. Because I know, as someone who likes to play video games, although you wouldn't think it, given I'm playing the role of the curmudgeon in this debate, but I actually do like video games. I know there's nothing you like more than a recommendation. And so presumably they wouldn't be mentioning these games unless they were recommending them. So I'm going to just quickly roll through some of the games that have been mentioned. If you're interested, I'll include the description when they have a description. And if you're interested, you can go and follow them up yourself. Okay, for instance, the quietly beautiful game Journey, where you can come across other players in your travel across the desert, only being able to communicate with your movements and a single musical note. Baldur's Gate 3, I've been recommended. Also, games like Disco Elysium that have no really gameplay element aside from walking around, selecting dialogue options and reading. Metal Gear Solid 4 infamously has movie-length cutscenes. Bioshock threw you into an Ayn Rand wet dream, a separate society at the bottom of the ocean where rich mid-20th century libertarians had gone to escape the riffraff, but then discovered a highly addictive drug that basically turns anyone who takes it into X-Men, and then a civil war ensued. Gone Home puts you in the shoes of a college student arriving home from a gap year overseas in the middle of a severe storm, so the TV and phones are out and your family aren't at home. The game is you finding the spare key, letting yourself in, and then slowly figuring out what's going on based on the mundane relics of domestic life. And in the process, discovering some deep and fairly affecting family secrets. Sounds interesting. Deathloop is kind of an action version of Groundhog Day. Every time your character dies, you wake up and it's the morning of the same day again, which your character also remembers. Given that dying and trying again is a core part of gaming, smart way to tell the story. The narrative doesn't pause where you try and fail and try again. Anyway, that's just a selection, a small selection of the number of games I've been suggested. I just want to share with you guys. So that's correspondence for you. DOGE Strategis. I got some Eagle correspondence from you. I'm not sure if you're the one who does this every time, but you're the one who did this week. I know that eagles live in Aries, not eagles' nests. But we've got a sting now, so from now on, it is definitely eagle's nest. Just the eagle's nest sounds so much better than the airy. I'm not going to do the airy. But thank you anyway, Dodge Strategist, for trying to set me straight with proper English. Jim correspondence. I'm talking Jim Holding. Lots of appreciation for Jim, but yeah, some people not appreciative of Jim at all. There was something that when people criticised that interview, they had in common. And I'm going to quote Major on this one. Major says, Jim skirts over the obvious dodginess of stablecoins and Tether. We don't know if they're backed by anything as they refuse to be audited. Now, I don't know the first thing about crypto, despite my best efforts to try and be able to conduct a decent interview. I really have tried. I don't have a finance brain. I don't understand what a lot of that meant. But I know it's right because I got a lot of people saying the same thing, which is stablecoins are meant to be tied to the dollar, but they're not. But Tether is not audited. Should be audited. A lot of people said that, so I'm sure it's correct. I don't know what it means though. But sharing it, and nevertheless, NOAA correspondence. And yes, a few people did say I shouldn't call it NOAA, I should call it NOAA. Yeah, whatever. Malteser, and that's a great name, as an M-O-L-T teaser. Malteser. Malteser, on the cuts to weather. I'd like to add as a third-year civil engineering student that it's very concerning. At least here in Australia, we depend significantly on volunteers measuring rainfall and wind, among other factors, that the federal agency here, the BOM, then organises and presents in a way that's actually usable. If you get rid of the agency collating all the data in one place, it becomes almost unusable. For example, I can foresee a situation if this is privatised where not all gauges will be on all private collation sites, meaning when the engineers go to do their flood planning, like 100-year floods and such, they're likely to severely underestimate potential flooding if they only have access to data from a limited number of gauges that their company happens to have a deal with the private collection site. That is concerning. So I just will share with you because I had no idea about that. And then we've got a...
Smell the Musk. Smell the Musk.
USA! USA!
Smell the Musk.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Smell the Musk correspondence. Okay. Once again, we actually have a Smell the Musk section coming up, so I could have just put this there, but I wanted to play this thing twice. I'm chasing that high now. This is like the heroin of stings. I'm just going harder and harder.
I think that's the first time I've had to listen to it in situ, and it was uncomfortable.
yes, it was. Soon it will be the entire podcast. Okay, it's from Chase. I'm going to read this a little long because I thought it was an interesting point. First, I just want to clarify I'm not a Musk fanboy. Since I read that, I thought, okay, I know where this is going. But I didn't know where it was going. First, I just want to clarify, I'm not a Musk fanboy. He absolutely should never have gotten so wrapped up in politics. But I do believe in his vision of making an electric car that people actually want to drive. I've followed his career for a long time. It's baffling how much people seem to want him to fail. What they don't realise is that if he fails, it's not just about him, it's a setback for the broader goal of moving away from heavily polluting cars. There's been a claim that Musk's only real talent is convincing people he's smart when he's not, which to me is a complete misread of what he's actually done. There's no way to be as successful as he is if you're just a grifter. Here's what really bugs me though. That kind of thinking isn't just a right-wing thing where people assume that being good in one field, say business, means you'll be good at another, politics. The left is also guilty of the reverse. If someone is bad at something, Musk in politics, then everything they do must be garbage. It's like there's no room for the idea that someone can be both an engineering genius and a complete disaster in another field. This black and white way of thinking isn't just about Musk either. It's drifting into other areas of politics, like, say, the Israel-Gaza situation. The right treats Israel as if it can do no wrong, while the left acts as if everything Israel does is evil. But people seem incapable of holding two things in their heads. Israel is not either all good or all bad. Just like purely being born a Palestinian doesn't mean that everything you do is good or bad. The reality is more complicated than one side good, one side bad, but that kind of nuance is completely lost in political discourse right now. And then he asks my view about that kind of thing. Okay, I did not expect this to get into a discussion about nuance, but I think that's the key word right at the end there. Nuance is the key word that Chase is talking about. He asks what I think. I think it is undeniable that there is less nuance than there used to be. Why is an interesting question. Melina, do you have any thoughts? Do you agree for a start? And secondly, do you have a thought why?
I don't agree that it's undeniable that it's worse. I mean, certainly we see a lot of polarization, but, was American politics more nuanced in the era of the Cold War, say? Like, I think you would have found a lot of people back then who thought everything to do with America and capitalism is amazing and everything to do with Russia and Russians and the Soviet Union is awful. I'm not going to defend the Soviet Union, but, I think that black and white thinking is, not everyone thinks that way, but there have always been a lot of people who thought that way. I mean, I haven't tried to track it in detail, so I'm not saying it's definitely not worse, but I would push back a little bit on the idea that, we haven't always had a lot of people who think like that, even though I'm not a fan of that style of thinking.
It's interesting. I mean, look, I think for number one, I love you pushing back. That is one of the things I think is great about you. But I mean, yeah, I'd agree in terms of, America versus Russia during the Cold War. Not a lot of nuance there. But yeah, I mean, I'm thinking, for instance, I'm thinking back to sort of the 80s, the 90s. I'm thinking back to I'm thinking to discussions on, firing line or something from 20 or 30 years ago. They were significantly more nuanced debates than the political debates that we have today. That's the kind of thing which I'm thinking. I'm thinking about Donahue. You guys know I like Donahue. I'm thinking about, I'm trying to remember the guy's name, a talk show host. This is another thing I'm grateful for, by the way, on YouTube. Dick Cavett. Look up Dick Cavett on YouTube, old Dick Cavett episodes, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Dick Cavett was a talk show host in the 70s and 80s who interviewed people for an hour, sometimes 2 hours. And the nuance of the discussions was just beautiful. It was just really, really intelligent TV. And he'd get such random people. You get Truman Capote sitting next to John Lennon. You get these massive celebrities next to he is what Bill Maher thinks he is, but Bill Maher is not that.
I do think that there are still
that's gone.
I think there are still people who are very thoughtful, nuanced interviewers in the media ecosystem. It's just that the media ecosystem is populated with so many more voices in general, and social media and the internet tends to reward the more black and white reactionary people. So we hear those voices a lot. But I still think there are people who have that same mindset of, nuanced like I listened to just a really interesting interview just today on the Daily, the New Yorker podcast, where they were talking with some academics who had researched COVID lockdowns, and my impression was they were left-leaning people, but they were challenging the orthodoxies around whether the lockdowns actually helped prevent deaths in the states where it was stricter. And the interviewer it was a great interview because, the topic itself was quite contrarian, and then the interviewer was probing and pushing back and sort of challenging all of their assumptions to sort of tease out, is this contrarian idea right or not? But in a very balanced and open way, and it was just a really great interview. So just today, I would say I've listened to, it was like a 45-minute interview. So whether that's happening less on TV, maybe, although there's a lot more TV in general, might be happening more in podcasts like this one. But I do think that there are still people out there like that, but we just also hear a lot from the people who are not that way.
Yeah, no, look, I think you're making a good case there, Melina, I have to say. And I do think that what has happened is that TV has outsourced that function to YouTube and to podcasts. There is no one that does that on TV, any TV. But people don't go to TV for that anymore. They go to YouTube for that. So that is part of the changing media diet. And I completely, what I was going to say, you already said, which was, I was going to say, I think social media rewards a lack of nuance and punishes nuance. And that has an effect on all our brains. That's what I was going to say, Chase. But I think you make an interesting case on it, so maybe I'll just shut up. I will say one thing before I move on to your correspondence. I know there was one just for you, which I passed on to you, which I'm very eager to see what you do with, because it was nuanced, that's for sure. And that is, I saw an example just this week, Chase, of what you're talking about, the all or nothing mindset. And this is a video involving Mark Kelly, who you might recall got into a bit of a stoush with Elon Musk online recently. Elon Musk called him a traitor when he got back from Ukraine. And this is how Mark Kelly has responded.
All right, here I am with my new ride, Chevy, good old Chevy Tahoe, here in Washington, D.C. Got one of these in Tucson as well. This one was made by Union Labor, United Auto Workers in Arlington, Texas. Always good to buy Union cars, incredibly reliable. And I'm looking forward to driving this for many, many years.
I did miss out an essential part of the setup, which is he used to have a Tesla and he traded it in so he could get the Chevy Tahoe. Now, this is a classic example of what Chase is talking about. The Chevy Tahoe is not an electric vehicle. So Mark Kelly, who's the astronaut, Mr. Environment, Mr. Blue Marble, the world is wonderful, let's save it by driving electric cars, is now turned his back on his own philosophy just because he's got the shits with Elon Musk.
Why didn't he just buy another electric car brand?
I don't know.
They exist.
I've got no idea. Maybe thought that the non-Tesla electric cars are crap. I don't know. I know, but the fact is, dude, you don't need to trade your car in just because you don't like Elon Musk. Elon Musk is not his car. You don't need to do that.
And you've already paid him the money.
Yeah.
When you bought it in the first place.
That's right. And then especially to trade in for a non-electric vehicle, you just go, well, you're kind of cutting off your nose to spite your face here. Now, I'm not trying to have a go at Mark Kelly. I'm just saying this is the mindset that I think Chase is referring to. That when people hate what Musk is doing with politics and with Twitter, they go, well, fuck his cars. And there's a lot of that at the moment. And I'm not sure that's necessarily a great outcome for the world, to be honest. Unless there's something wrong with his cars are doing something good, I would have thought. I say someone who could never afford a Tesla.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I do think it would be a good outcome of all of this if lefties who are so inclined just switch to other brands of electric cars and then more right-wing people bought Teslas because more electric cars in general is a good thing.
That would be good. I
can understand to an extent people who, if you can afford to swap out a car on a whim, don't want to drive a Tesla anymore just because it's you could see it's publicly signaling to the world an association with someone and you don't want it to be perceived as an endorsement. He's within his rights to say, I don't like this person. I don't want to drive something that's branded with a brand that's synonymous with that person that I have a massive objection to. I think I'm not saying I would necessarily trade in a Tesla personally if I had one already, but, I think that's fine. It just seems a little bit counterproductive to trade it for a non-electric car.
Yeah. And look, and I also understand. Let's express some understanding from Mark Kelly here. Like, he's not the only person who has views on Tesla cars. He's existing in a context where he probably gets crap for having a Tesla. Like, the people he knows probably give him crap about it. His friends, his colleagues, his allies.
And he's been personally attacked by Elon, so it's more than just I don't like their politics.
No, I know that as well. But I'm just saying, even leaving that aside, like, maybe if I was in his shoes, I'd want to get rid of my Tesla too, just because I wouldn't want it to be constantly getting graffitied and people yelling at me and people being angry at me. And, maybe the problem isn't Mark Kelly. Maybe the problem is the context that he is in, which also lacks nuance. So that's what I'm saying. I'm not trying to have a go at Mark Kelly. I'm just citing this as an exhibit A for what Chase is talking about. Yeah. Anyway.
Elon did reposted just the other day someone else's ex-post saying Stalin, Mao and Hitler didn't murder millions of people. Their public sector employees did. So if you follow Musk's logic, you shouldn't credit him for anything good that happens at Tesla or bad for that matter, because leaders have nothing to do with it.
Great call. Well done. Very nice. Okay, why don't you tell us about your correspondence?
Yeah, so last time I was on the podcast, I talked about J.D. Vance's visit to Germany and his interactions with the candidate for chancellor for the AfD, which is their far-right party that has flirted a number of times with Nazi things. I was going to say Nazi adjacent, but that's too generous. And Michael, who writes from East Germany, wanted to add some additional context that was very good. So I thought I would share that, including that the AfD placards using the phrase Alles für Deutschland, which we talked about last time was a homonym for a Nazi slogan, were on full display in the streets where he lives. So the party was truly leaning into this, allusions to Nazism and kind of winking at it and diminishing the seriousness of it. But in particular, he added more context to the ongoing divide between East and West Germany and how that relates to the country's history and their politics today. So thought we would just read some of that out because it was quite interesting from someone who's living in that environment. He says, it's not exactly correct that the GDR swept the Nazi history under the rug. Our German teachers said that they had to read Mein Kampf in school, and most people here know a great deal about the Nazi past. It would have been a pretty hard thing to ignore. The difference in the GDR was to try and argue that the fascists were from the West, despite the fact that a great deal of Prussian iconography and military structures were adopted, which originate in the eastern regions, and to emphasize the bad things the Allies did, particularly the firebombing of Dresden, which is still commemorated. There's more of a victim mentality and hostility towards the West in that sense, which was obviously influenced by the Soviet Union. What Melina describes was actually more the case in Austria, as they wanted to see themselves as being victims of Nazism, despite many being happy to go along with it. There's much more that can be said as well about the aftermath of the reunification and the resentment for the massive loss of employment and sense of being annexed by the West instead of actually reuniting. The difference in how people feel about the role of the state, history that goes even way further back. After all, Germany is still very regional and diverse with many dialects. How people feel being looked down on by the Westies, among other things. It's interesting to note that the AfD were formed in 2013 in the West as a Eurosceptic party by some right-wing economists, but then adopted anti-immigrant populism and pivoted towards the East as they realized they could tap into some of the resentments people had to get more support. I thought they were all really great and interesting points that just adds a little bit more detail to what we were talking about last time. It's certainly true about Austria, the birthplace of Hitler. Now we're going to get complaints from Austrians. But the openness to the far right in Germany on this scale is very new, precisely because Germany is so engaged with the worst parts of their history, which is not the case in Austria or many other countries that have atrocities in their history, which is why it's such a shame, I think, that people are increasingly pushing against that awareness of history, because I think it was to the benefit of their society that there is this openness to dealing with it and it's a cliche to say never again, but it's very important. Never again, please. And we're talking about the Holocaust. I also thought it was interesting the point he alludes to about the sense of resentment, how much the sense of resentment underpins so many racist and nationalist movements around the world, not just in Germany. It's not a happy movement, these kind of, ethno-nationalist movements around the world. And they really are so often underpinned by a sense of resentment to others, in the sense that other people are getting ahead. Why aren't I getting ahead? It must be someone else's fault. And so I think that was just it's Germany and not America, but some of those things that underpin those movements and those sentiments, I think, also do apply to some of the things we talk about more often.
Absolutely, and I applaud your bravery to come out talking about how much you approve of examining the negative history of a country. I didn't expect this would be the podcast. You come out in favour of Confederate statues, but thanks for that.
Well, they don't have statues of Hitler in Germany, so I don't think that's quite what I mean.
No, they don't. And I obviously know the actual history of those Confederate statues. Just being cheeky. While you're running hot there, Melina, why don't you get into the first bit of content, which is the shutdown, in particular the Schumer shutdown.
Yes, the shutdown that wasn't. So there was a deadline last Friday for the shutdown of the government. For people, just to remind people, if a shutdown did occur, only essential services would continue and federal employees are furloughed. And a continuing resolution extends current spending, so avoids a shutdown. That's another way of saying it kicks the budget can down the road for 6 months before we end up in this place yet again.
By the way, just before you go on, I've got a trivia question for you. Guess when the last time the House managed to pass each of the required appropriations bills by the start of the fiscal year, so no continuing resolutions were required.
2007.
1997.
Jesus.
Go on.
I thought maybe they started getting tricky around Obama, but no. Great. Usually Republicans have trouble passing continuing resolutions. The House Freedom Caucus in particular usually has objections to them. But this time they endorsed it and it passed with less opposition from Republicans than was expected. And I think there's a chance that left Democrats slightly flat-footed in their response, that maybe they were expecting Republicans to be a bit messier in their treatment of it. And as a result, Democrats arguably looked a little bit messy, which we'll get to. So just to deal with the actual vote, last Wednesday the House voted 217 to 213 to pass the continuing resolution to keep the government open.
Yep.
All Republicans except one voted for it, and all Democrats except one voted against it. In the Senate, it passed 54 to 46. 10 Democrats voted to break the party's filibuster to advance the bill to a final vote. And on that vote, 2 Democrats supported the bill and 1 Republican opposed it. So more Democrats voted to not filibuster it than actually voted to pass the resolution.
Gotcha.
There were a couple of Democrat votes. When that happened, House Democrats were pissed.
Yes.
Their expectation was that Senate Democrats would follow their lead and also vote to block the bill. They felt that that was a strategy that had been decided upon between the two houses, and it didn't happen. Democrats, the fight that Democrats were having, because usually they are the ones that want to keep the government running, and the reason they were flirting with the idea of not doing so in this case was that they wanted reassurances that if they passed the bill, Trump would spend the money the way that Congress had intended. And they did not get those reassurances. So instead, Trump has a lot of discretion over huge amounts of spending in this bill, which Democrats are worried could be used as a slush fund.
Yes.
Spending bills usually have specific funding directives. Hundreds of those were dropped in this bill, which gives Trump more say over how to spend the money. So, for example, there was a Democrat memo saying the bill would allow the administration to steer money that was supposed to be for combating fentanyl and instead use it on their mass deportation initiatives. So things like that, where normally Congress would say you have to spend this money for this stuff, and instead it's like, here's a suggestion, and Trump can kind of spend it how he wants. So that's why they didn't like it. That's what they were trying to push back on fundamentally. But the Republicans were not for compromising. They did not give them any assurances that they were saying take it or leave it. The alternative, you want to jump in?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, first of all, just clarify what you were just saying. That actually, what the actual bill ended up being the opposite of what the Democrats are wanting. No, not just not what they wanted, but the opposite. They were hoping to restrict Musk and Trump more, and it actually gave them more freedom. But also, I just want to say the other thing is that people kept on referring to the bill as a clean bill. And the clean bill is basically to say take the bill from last year, extend it another 6 months. Like just keep the spending levels just identical. It wasn't a clean bill. That was a bit of marketing. Yes, the spending levels were quite similar. The spending was $7 billion less, which is out of $1.6 trillion isn't much. Defense spending was $6 billion higher. Non-defense discretionary spending was $13 billion lower. So I mean, that's on the margins, but the details were the issue. It added funding for border enforcement. It zeroed out the toxic exposures fund for veterans exposed to burn pits and toxic chemicals. It ended the community-oriented policing services program, which is a very popular program amongst Democrats because it gets kids off the street in a way it doesn't throw them in jail, and also cut funding for public schools. And then also on top of that, it had, like you said, didn't have the details to direct the spending away in a particular way from Musk and Trump, but also it didn't had the thing I told you guys about last week where it specifically banned Congress from trying to question Trump's emergency declaration that his tariffs are based on. Because Congress has the ability to stop Trump's bullshit emergency that his tariffs are based on. And the bill specifically said they were not allowed to question that emergency. So it's those tiny little details that make Democrats very unhappy and not want to support this bill. So I just want to throw that. Also, one more thing I'd add in is on the detail aspect, when Vance went to campaign to the House Republicans to get them on to unite to support this bill, he explicitly sold that. He explicitly told them, don't worry, it doesn't matter what the numbers are, we'll just spend the money wherever we want because of the way the bill's structured, so we can. So he promised to impound money. Impound money is when you don't use the money that's been given to you by Congress, or you just use it somewhere else. He said he promised to do that, even though that's supposedly unconstitutional. So that really pissed off the Democrats as well. So that's just a bit of extra context.
Yes, yeah. All good points. Yeah. The alternative to funding the bill was shutting down the government, which, as much as they hated the bill for all the powers it gave Trump, if they passed it, shutting down the government could allow Trump to decide which workers get to come back to work and which ones don't, potentially permanently shuttering large parts of the government. So, when there's a shutdown, workers who aren't essential go home. Trump gets to decide who are the ones that get to go home. And it's easier for them to just say, never come back, than, which is exactly what they're trying to do right now through DOGE. So either way, people were going to get hurt and Democrats were going to get an outcome that they did not like.
Yeah.
So should they have passed the bill or not passed the bill?
Do you have thoughts?
I do have thoughts.
Oh, give them to us.
Yeah, I have some thoughts from a policy perspective and some thoughts from a political, strategic perspective.
Sure. Well,
so
let's break it up.
Let's talk policy first.
Yeah. Okay.
I personally do think passing the bill was the less bad option. I hate that the US government has this self-imposed crisis every 6 months.
Yes.
They don't have to do this. This is a rule they put on themselves. It's a terrible rule. It creates uncertainty and stress for federal workers who suffer if politicians can't get their act together. It creates uncertainty for the broader economy, which is bad for the economy. It creates uncertainty and stress for people who rely on government services, which can be interrupted at any point every 6 months. It sucks up time and oxygen for lawmakers that could be used on better priorities because they're constantly debating whether to fund the government or not. And it clearly fails as a way to impose any kind of spending discipline because we can see that there has been no spending discipline.
Yes.
So I don't understand the point of having these shutdowns every 6 months. I just think I think shutdowns are bad,
Yeah.
and Democrats have traditionally held the line that shutdowns are bad, and they should continue that line.
Can I throw in another policy reason they suck? You get bad value when you're buying things, purchasing, making deals, purchasing equipment 3 months at a time. It's convenience store prices. Whereas if you can buy in bulk, you can plan 10 years ahead. When there's some kind of certainty, you can get value. And this is a particular issue for defence. But even without defence, just right across the board, you get bad value with the shutdown economy.
Yep. Also, from a political and strategic perspective, some Democrats think Republicans would have gotten the blame for this shutdown because they control all the levers of government.
Yep.
I disagree. I think given Republicans do control all levers of government, they'd be in a better position to pin the blame on Democrats. Like, good luck as a House Democrat or Senate Democrat getting a message out there that Trump is to blame for a shutdown when Trump is doing a presser every day calling it a Democrat shutdown. Like,
A Schumer shutdown.
Who is going to suck up the media oxygen in that battle and win? I think it's going to be Trump.
Yeah.
Also, it's a particularly hard argument to prosecute when Republicans were uncharacteristically united on the bill. It also, I think, would be quite disingenuous to try and escape responsibility for a shutdown when they would have been the ones who voted for it.
Yeah, it's their fault.
Why should people blame Republicans who voted to fund the government over the Democrats who didn't? It would be their shutdown.
If you literally have, and this is what they would have had, if you literally had every single Republican senator and every single Republican House member, bar one, voting for the budget, and the Democrats all over the place, of course people aren't going to think it's the Republicans' fault.
Yeah, like it's a fantasy based on priors that Republicans usually get the blame.
Yeah.
That's because Republicans are usually the ones voting for the shutdown.
Yes.
People aren't that stupid, and I think it's a little bit cynical to suggest that they could have tricked people into believing that it was somehow Republicans' fault.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good call. I'll just do a couple other things on that, on the who owns the shutdown thing. By the way, Raphael Warnock was a classic example of what you were talking about. I got a quote from him here. This is their bill. If there's a government shutdown, they're in control of the House. They're in control of the Senate. They're in control of the White House. It's their shutdown. And I think that's bullshit for exactly the reasons you just said. Also, the Dems would have seemed super hypocritical blocking the budget after spending the last, 20 years criticising Republicans for blocking the budget.
Yeah.
So I think it would actually, not just would they have owned it, but they would have owned it in an ugly way as well. They would have looked very cynical. The Democrats don't even have to vote for it. They just have to not filibuster it. Like, of course they're going to.
Yeah, which is what happened.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Chuck
And-
Schumer didn't vote for it.
No, that's right. Yeah, his own shutdown, the Schumer shutdown. Also, if the Democrats had blocked it or had said, no, we just want to pass this 30-day budget, which is what they were saying. Their alternative was not to shut down the government. The alternative was, don't pass a 6-month continuing resolution, pass a 30-day continuing resolution, and then let's negotiate over 30 days. If they had successfully passed a 30-day resolution, which they wouldn't have because the Republicans wouldn't have supported them, but if they had successfully passed that, the House had gone home. Like, of course the Democrats would get the blame. Like they're the ones playing the tricks. When the Republicans have done their job, they've passed their budget and they've gone home. You know, so it's so I'm inclined. Also, one other thing: Republicans are much better at messaging than Democrats are generally. Like, you talk about Trump, but it's not just him. I mean, in the middle of all this, the Democrats put out. I couldn't believe this. They put out 9 Democrats copy-pasted exactly the same message in their tweets. Here, that message there. House Democrats stand united for a 4-week funding extension that stops harmful cuts, keeps the government open, and allows Congress to reach a bipartisan funding agreement. I am ready to vote today, tomorrow, or Friday to pass a bipartisan extension. I don't think it's going to come off as authentic, guys. It's just... So anyway, the only other thing I'd say about owning it is some people have pointed to the Quinnipiac poll, which asked Americans whom they blame most for a shutdown. 22% said Trump, 31% said Republicans in Congress, and 32% said Democrats in Congress. So you might say, well, that's 32% Democrats, 53% Republicans. But who knows what happens when the shutdown actually occurs and people start campaigning about it.
Yeah.
I think we knew what it was going to say.
Yes.
I'll leave it to you.
And there's been a lot of talk about, a desire for Democrats to fight, to put up a fight against Trump.
Yes.
Look, I get the Democrats are angry. Losing sucks. Being out of power sucks. But the reality is that they are out of power. There's only so much they can do when they don't control any part of the government. And they are supposed to be the party that believes in government working in general and being funded specifically. Like selling out their values for the sake of voting against something Trump wants isn't a long-term strategy. And the principle of being an obstructionist opposition party is something you do when you don't want your opponent to be seen as effective and delivering for the people. But Trump's wins right now are mostly not popular. So letting Trump get a win is arguably not going to hurt them because it's letting Trump, not that they have that much power to stop him anyway, but, I think the best path to resisting Trump really is letting him fail on his own rather than muddying the waters by inflicting more pain on people yourself. Like, if they want to stop DOGE, what does DOGE want? DOGE wants to tear down the government. So if you vote for a government shutdown, aren't you giving Musk exactly what he wants? I'm pretty sure he'd love a shutdown. There's reporting suggesting he was explicitly hoping for one.
Yes. I'd actually take almost the opposite line to make the same point you're making, which is rather than saying to want the best way to make DOGE fail, let's take the counter example where you go, okay, let's say it does fail. Let's say the economy fails, which a lot of people are expecting to be about to happen. What do you think Trump's going to say if there's a shutdown and the economy fails? He's going to say it's because of the shutdown. It's because of the Democrats. Whereas if the Democrats have done nothing, if they don't stick their heads up, if the economy is all Trump's when it fails, he's got no one to blame but himself. It'll be much more effective in handing him a brick when he's out in the ocean. If you don't have your fingerprints on it.
Yeah. And what beat Trump last time? Was it some killer line of attack or some awesome Democrat strategy? Or was it Trump just screwing it up on his own and Democrats then just being available when people were like, what else have we got? Yeah. I also think the best resistance against DOGE right now is the courts. Like, they're the only people with any objective power to stop this. And you make it harder for the courts to get people back to work if there's a shutdown.
I've got a clip from Chuck Schumer making exactly that point.
A shutdown could stall federal court cases, one of the best redoubts against Trump's lawlessness. It could require to furlough critical staff at the courts, denying victims and defendants alike their day in court, dragging out appeals, and clogging the justice system for months or even years.
Yes, I agree. Having said that, just so I'm not too nice to Schumer, I do also think that they could have managed this whole situation a lot better than what they did politically, particularly the fact that Schumer was signaling to Democrats that he and the Senate would vote no right up until he voted yes.
I 100% agree.
That was not awesome.
The day before, he was campaigning to vote against the bill.
Yeah, I don't think it's the worst thing for Democrats to vote differently on the bill, depending on their district, depending on their beliefs. I don't think that everyone always says oh, Dems in disarray. I don't think they have to be totally unified weeks into a new administration, and that this is the time for trying different things to ultimately figure out what's the best line of attack, what's the best strategy, what is the best identity of the Democrat Party going forward so that you're ready when it really matters. So I think Democrats not voting altogether is totally fine. The problem is that you created a situation where the House Democrats were unified when it wasn't necessarily in all of their personal interests to be thinking that they were all going to be unified across Congress, and that didn't happen. So I do understand the anger from the House Democrats from that perspective, who feel like they were sold down the river a little bit.
So can I throw in as well a point from Dale? This is a
Hey!
Does a government shutdown play to what DOGE wants? If shutdowns occur, but the world doesn't end, does that prove there's government fat that can be cut? Can see Trump and Musk frothing over that outcome. Yeah, I think he's right. I mean, I know you already mentioned the DOGE angle, but I think that's a different DOGE angle, which I think is a good one. If you furlough a bunch of people and because you deem them as non-essential and then no one even notices, that's a great justification to then sack them, even if you didn't intend to before. So I think throw that into the mix as well.
Yeah. And my bottom line is that everything that Democrats have said in the past about why shutdowns are bad remains true.
Yes.
So if they're going to back away from that now, like, what are they, like, there has to be something that they're getting out of a shutdown that's worth it, right? Like, what would they actually have gotten out of a shutdown? And if the answer is nothing, because Trump can deem everything he wants to do essential and leave out the stuff he doesn't care about, then what's the point of inflicting all that pain on federal workers and the people who rely on them? Like, I just think it was quite short-sighted for them to go down that path in the first place.
I just want to throw in a couple of extra points in this section as well. I reckon Schumer's best point, which hasn't been made much, but I think it's the beauty, is I would play the quote, but it goes forever, is he noted that if we go into a shutdown, there's no off-ramp because how you stop a shutdown is totally determined by the Republican House and Senate. The Democrats have no control over that at all. That they've shown, this is Schumer again, they've shown complete blind obeisance to Trump, DOGE, etc. They could keep us in a shutdown for months and months and months. And I think he's absolutely right, especially if the shutdown's working for Trump. Why would he stop the shutdown? And the Democrats can, like, the only reason he'd stop the shutdown is if it's not working for him anymore. So if it is working for him, he'll just keep it going permanently. It's and the Democrats couldn't do anything about it. Democrats would have gotten America into that situation, but they wouldn't be able to get America out of that situation. I thought that was a very subtle point, which I thought was a good one from Schumer as well. And another thing which Schumer says, which I think is also true, is that the number one thing Democrats can do to make Trump to defeat Trump is to make him as unpopular as possible. And he notes that when presidents fall into the low 40s, maybe even below 40, Congress starts deserting them. People are surprised that Congress is sucking up to Trump when he's rating at 47% approval. Like, let's see how they suck up when he's at 38% approval. That, you know, when they're trying to save their own skin, it's a different situation. And Schumer says the Republicans would like to have some freedom from Trump, but they won't until we bring him down in popularity. That happened with Bush in 2005. It happened with Trump in 2017. When it happens, I'm hopeful that our Republican colleagues will resume working with us. And so he's saying the best thing Democrats can do to bring down the Republican popularity right now is stick them with Trump's shitty economy. Give it to them. Once again, hand them the brick and go, all yours. And that will take 2 or 3 points off him, and that will make them less likely to be unified. And then you can peel off a couple more, and then you get a bit of a spiral. I think he's right about that. He copped shit for that because people went, oh, the Republicans are never going to cross Trump. Yeah, once again, let's see what happens when he's got 10 points less in his approval rating. Okay, well, I just want to just take this from the other angle then, from the House people who wanted the shutdown. Because, you know, you've given your point of view, and your point of view happens to correspond with my point of view. But there was another view out there. You've mentioned what they were saying about, you know, some people wanted to see some fighting. There's literally only one opportunity for Democrats to do anything. Like, they only have one bit of leverage, and that is filibustering budgets. Other than that, they have zero leverage. They've just been kicked around for the last 2 months. They're about to be kicked around for another few months. And the only resistance, literally the only resistance they can show in Congress is this. And they just chose to not show it. So I understand how that could be demoralizing to the base. Even if it's poor tactics. Like, do you want your entire side to just give up and just have the shits? Like, that might not be a great tactic in itself. AOC's made a few points about this as well. Well, first of all, she made the point that this doesn't just not stop Elon. It actually helps Elon, she said.
The American people, if anyone has held a town hall or has seen what has been happening in town halls, American people, whether they are Republicans, independents, Democrats, are up in arms about Elon Musk and the actual gutting of federal agencies across the board. This continuing resolution codifies much of this chaos that Elon Musk is wreaking havoc on the federal government. It codifies many of those changes. It sacrifices and completely eliminates congressional authority in order to review these impulsive Trump tariffs that he's switching on and off. And on top of that, for folks who are concerned about effectiveness in government, this Republican extreme spending bill removes all of the guardrails and all of the accountability measures to ensure that money is being spent in the way that Congress has directed for it to be spent. This turns the federal government into a slush fund for Donald Trump and Elon Musk. It sacrifices congressional authority, and it is deeply partisan. And so to me, it is almost unthinkable why Senate Democrats would vote to hand the few pieces of leverage that we have away for free.
She also made the point, just to elaborate on something you said before about the House members who vote for this expecting the Senate to vote with them. A lot of those are in moderate districts. Some of them are in Trump voting districts, and they sacrificed their own best interests to support the team. And then Schumer just screwed them over. Now, I actually think the problem there is not the vote of Schumer. It's, once again, what you said before, the fact that he, like an idiot, was going one way and then just switched. Because everything we just described, Schumer could have seen a month ago. He didn't need us to tell him that. He didn't need to wait till the day that he changed his mind to know that. He should have known the moment Republicans were united in the House to get there, like that day, he should have just changed his mind immediately and said, okay, we're gonna support the bill. Because at that point in time, there was never any other realistic outcome other than them having to swallow it somewhere down the track. So he might as well swallow it as early as possible to do the least amount of damage. I think that was the problem from Chuck Schumer. They took so long to make up his mind. But anyway, that was another point AOC made. Also, Cory Booker made the point, whatever option, this is a fight thing. I thought he put this quite well. Whatever option the Dems take, they're doomed. Both options suck. So why don't you pick the doomed option where you at least fight, because that motivates your base, is how he put it.
We are in a perverse, bizarro land where we're having to decide between letting Donald Trump wreck the government this way or wreck the government that way. So at what point do you say I'm going to stand and fight?
And by the way, polling backs this up. CNN have the House Democrats at record low approvals of 29% at the moment. That's a record since 1992 when they started measuring that. They got Republicans at 36% approval. Only 63% of Democrats have a favourable view of Democrats. That's down 9% since January. 57% of Democrats say they favour stopping the GOP agenda over working with the GOP. 42% favour working with the GOP over stopping the GOP agenda. You might go, well, that's not that big a deal. Back in 2017, it was 74% saying work with the GOP, 23% saying stop the GOP agenda in Trump's first term. So they've come a long way, the Democrats, in wanting to fight.
Where I'd push back on that, though, is that that's a very generic statement. And, you can, first of all, argue that by voting for a shutdown, you're not stopping the GOP agenda. You're enabling the most, controversial parts of the GOP agenda, again, by letting them shut down the government, which is the thing everyone's been so mad about for the past 2 months. Yeah. The fact that they're trying to shut down big parts of the government. Also, again, in theory, people might like the idea of fighting when they have a sense that they can do something. I'm sure that that's appealing, the feeling of let's do something and this is the only thing you can do. But would they feel the same way in a month's time when you have government workers in the news talking about how they can't pay their rent and people who are relying on government services not able to sign up for Social Security because they can't get anyone on the phone and they can't, like, they're having to wait for hours at an office to try and get someone to hear their case, or, you know, when they're going to a federal park and it's closed and they can't go hiking anymore. You know, there's like so many, and like people, I think, probably underestimate how much they deal with federal services in their day-to-day life. And so, you know, I think, look, you know, it's a hypothetical, but I would be curious how much people would feel, how much it would feel like a win for Democrats when they saw how it played out in practice.
That's a great response. I mean, look, I just agree with you. but, you know, I'm just trying to showcase all the different sides.
I mean, the thing with AOC's argument, just to jump back to that quickly, is like, she makes great points too. Like, as we said, you know, earlier on, there was not a good option, right? So you can take either side and argue why the other side is a terrible option because they're both right. Both sides are terrible options. What I come back to is when you're faced with two terrible options, what's the better guiding principle? Fighting for the sake of fighting, or sticking with your long-held political principles and beliefs? And which, in the case of Democrats, is usually funding the government, supporting the government, making government work. And to me, like, that does feel like a pretty core Democrat principle, and that's worth sticking with, because in this crazy world, like, if you're just going to give up your principles for the sake of kind of thrashing around, then it's harder to own the outcome.
There is a third point of view, which we haven't discussed yet, which is the Nancy Pelosi point of view. Which is, the Nancy Pelosi point of view is, I mean, she wanted Schumer to not do what he did. But her point of view is not necessarily you just roll straight into a shutdown. Her point of view is, I never gave up something for nothing. I always got something out of it. And her argument is Schumer didn't even really try to get anything. He just gave up. And that also contrasts with Mitch McConnell as well. Like, I got a clip from Van Jones coming up here where he was saying that he thinks that's part of the reason people are frustrated, because they've just watched Mitch McConnell for the past 20 years. Just going, yeah, Mitch McConnell just always found a way to screw over Democrats. And now the Democrats are just rolling over. Let's have a look.
There is a volcanic eruption of outrage at Leader Schumer because we want a Mitch McConnell. I remember when Obama had all the cards, Mitch McConnell drove Obama nuts, twisted his pinky, broke his kneecaps, and got stuff done for Republicans when they shouldn't have gotten an inch. They got miles. We have a Senate majority leader who is beloved in this party, but we want somebody who's going to stand up to this bully. Stand up to this bully. Do something. And if you shut the government down and it gets a little bit crazy, at least some politics is about the rationality. There's an emotional need to stop Donald Trump and Elon Musk from running over this party. And I think Chuck Schumer has radically misread the room.
Okay, so there's that as well. Now, I suppose, given we agree on the fact that Schumer actually made the right call.
Eventually.
Yeah, and we agree that what he did wrong was how long it took him to make the right call. There is a third part to this, which we haven't discussed, which is, what are the consequences of this? And, you know, what do we think of those consequences? Because the Democrats, they're angry. They are, like, really angry. Like, there's no plain angry here. I'm not sure if you saw Hakeem Geoffrey's press conference the other day, but it was a real special.
Senator Jeffries, is it time for new leadership in the Senate?
Next question.
Mr. Leader. Senator Chuck Schumer is from your state. He has clearly a different view of this than you. He is not saying let's go back to the negotiating table. He's saying let's take this vote. So have you lost confidence in him, the fact that you guys see this so differently?
Next question.
You have dodged multiple times questions about whether you have confidence right now in Chuck Schumer. Can I just, to clarify here, none of you are willing to say at this point that you have confidence in Chuck Schumer as leader?
You keep engaging in these parlor games because you want to take the focus off the American people. What we're saying is We look forward to continuing to work with our Senate colleagues, all of them, in opposition to the extremism that's being unleashed on the American people. But the focus right now is on everyday Americans, on children, on families, on veterans, on the people that we are fighting for, who Donald Trump and House Republicans are intentionally trying to hurt.
Okay, so he finally got on board just being boring. But but I mean, he's the leader of the Democrats in the House. Like, he could not have been more blatant about not supporting Chuck Schumer there. And I notice as well that the anger seems to be expressed through a gender gap. Not gender, generation gap. Slotkin, Galejo, Ossoff, Mark Kelly, Andy Kim, Lisa Rochester Allbrooks. Lisa Rochester and Angela Allbrooks all got very different politics from each other, but they're all on the same side of the fight. In the Senate, that is. And that's against Chuck Schumer, the young people. Whereas you look at the people to defeat the filibuster and deal with the Republicans, Schumer, Fetterman, Cortez Masto, Gillibrand, Angus King, Schatz, Durbin, Gary Peters, Jean Shaheen, Maggie Hassan. They skew old. They're not all old. Fetterman's not old, but...
They do skew moderate as well, which I accept your point that the people against Schumer are more diverse ideologically, but that is a more, at least the ones of us I'm more familiar with.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. I wouldn't say, I'd say the skew moderate is not as big as the skew old, though. It's up and coming Democrats are evolving, seemingly to me, to want to fight. I would suggest foolishly, but they are. Which makes me, sorry, go on, jump in.
I just think as well, like I heard, reports basically immediately saying, people should primary Schumer and specifically AOC should primary Schumer. And I did feel like it had a slightly opportunistic vibe to me, like not saying that the anger itself is not real. I believe that it is. But, I feel like the idea that people hadn't been thinking and talking about primarying Schumer and that there aren't a lot of ambitious young Democrats who'd love to be a Democrat senator from New York, before this moment, I'm more cynical about. Yeah. And so I think like there are often moments like this where people who, I heavily suspect, these intergenerational tensions have been running for a long time. There's certainly been plenty of discourse about very old politicians at all levels of government just hanging on to their positions and not making space for younger people. I'm sure there is a lot of built-up frustration and resentment, a lot of ambitious people who would like to see older leaders move out of the way to create more space for younger leaders. And so this is, I think, again, not that the anger is confected, but it is also an opportunity to push, I suspect, pre-existing agendas as well.
The AOC Schumer talk has been going for at least 4 years as well. It's not new. My question, though, is, are we on the precipice of a left-wing Tea Party where the next generation are people who are fighting against their own leadership, essentially?
Yeah, I've heard a lot of sort of discourse around that specific question. And in some ways, I kind of find it a bit odd to pin it specifically to the Tea Party, because there's been periods where younger generations push to influence, like say like the Vietnam War protests, or, I think that younger generations making a push to overtake older generations and having a different style or different priorities is not something that, was the Tea Party and then the left version of the Tea Party. And so in some ways, I don't find it a particularly helpful analogy to work out what's going on. I think especially with the Tea Party, like, a cynic might point out that, there was this very vicious opposition the moment a black man became president, and a real sense that, like the opposition, it was partly timed well with the evolution of cable news reaching its apex and Fox News being at, the apex of its powers. But, there was the idea that, Obama was on the pale, beyond the pale, the way people think Trump is beyond the pale now, it's quite different in terms of their political actions. I'm not saying Obama never did anything dodgy, but, it's hard to deny that there wasn't a strong backlash to the idea of a black man as president, even if people didn't say it. And the Tea Party framed their resistance in terms of ideology and being about, small government and the founders. And all of the people most famous for that movement have quickly revealed themselves to be not as ideologically dedicated to their supposed cause as they insisted they were back then. And I was always cynical about, what was really motivating them at the time. I'm not saying every person was motivated by racial animus. And in particular, I'm not pinning the people who, the Ted Cruzes of the world. I think there was also an opportunistic aspect to the politicians who got elected off the bat of that movement. But I think that the racial resentments about Obama being president was a big part of what drove that movement at that time. And I don't know that it's necessarily instructive to equate young people wanting to have a more aggressive form of government as being, I don't know that it necessarily tells me anything about what's happening today.
Okay. I'm not going to say that I disagree with what you said, because what does big mean when we're talking a big part of, what percentage? Because I think there is an equally big part to the Tea Party, which definitely, there's definitely some racial resentment there. That's why I'm saying I don't necessarily disagree with you. But I think there was an equally big part, which was all, and came from an equally cynical place, but a different cynical place. It's an equally big part. It was just a rebranding exercise, because the Republican Party after Bush was it was in the doldrums. It was an absolute record low. It was low 20% approval. It was horrible. And they were looking at the time, I remember, the talk was, well, you got Obama here who's incredibly popular, and you got these Republicans who everyone hates. Get ready for a decade on the sidelines. And the Tea Party came along just at that moment when they really needed to rebrand Republicans. And it made perfect sense for the Tea Party to be as much about criticising other Republicans as criticising Democrats, because everyone wanted to criticise Republicans. It gave them, by cauterising the old Republicans, it allowed the new Republicans to compete immediately in 2010, which is exactly what they did, and bounce back immediately. They're by turfing off the old Republican brand. Now, I don't need to tell you that the Democrats are in a similar situation right now. I just told you, 29% approval. Right? It's in fact, they're not in as bad a situation as the Republicans were in 2008, and Republicans managed to bounce back with the rebranding exercise. So that is where I think this could be relevant. You're right. There's no racial resentment driving them, but there is a need to rebrand in a big way.
You know what I actually find most instructive about the comparison, that if I was a Democrat strategist, I'd bear in mind, is that the Tea Party at that time represented grassroots energy, which is something that they, exactly as you said, they needed to get away from just feeling down on themselves. Yeah. But it is not the message that won them the presidency next time around. Donald Trump couldn't be further ideologically from, the idea of, following the founders' intentions and small government and fiscal discipline and all of these things. And so, he was critical of mainstream Republicans, but by that point, Tea Parties had already made the establishment. So I don't, I think the biggest lesson that I would draw if I was looking to draw a lesson from a political perspective is, whatever you're trying now, and wherever the energy is at right now, don't assume that's what's going to win you the next election. Just be open to other ideas as well. Yeah, that's great call. And I do agree with that. I was going to say, where you went in the end, I 100% agree. But when you're talking about, Trump certainly didn't epitomise Tea Party. I was going to say, the Tea Party was dead by 2016. The Tea Party was good for two elections, 2010 and 2012. By 2014, it was played out. And then they moved on to the next thing. But because it achieved its goal. Its goal is just to get the Republicans back in the game. And it managed that stunningly. And if there is a left-wing Tea Party, which is, what I mean by that is a group who essentially are resistance to both Democrats and Republicans.
and that gets them back in the game in 2026, I'm sure the same thing will happen. It will then just dissipate under its own gravity.
Yeah, there is also, in terms of the generational aspect, although, the young generation that are actually in Congress are not that young for the most part, but in terms of like actual young people, there is a real anger in the community, and not just in America and Australia and other countries as well, of young people who really do feel like they've been left behind in terms of the opportunities available to them and the way that, who society is geared to reward and who it's, geared to kind of leave behind. And that anger is very real. And there's not a lot going on to address it. And I don't think that, Biden tried with student loans. I don't think that that's the best approach because it doesn't apply it only applies to a minority of younger people, and the problems are so much bigger than that. So, I do think that there is a real unaddressed set of needs for younger people, and younger people are increasingly turned off politics, disgusted by politics, and very angry at politicians and the sense that they're ignored and left behind. And so, I do think that I don't want to, when I say, where the energy at is now is not necessarily where it's going to be in a few years, I don't say that to dismiss those issues, which I see as separate to the kind of, organized political movement, which I think is kind of anchored around people who are slightly older anyway.
Sure.
I will say, as a young person living in Australia, Biden never did anything for me.
He's right.
I'm loving. I wish we had a camera on Lockie in the lockbox because he's gone the full hoodie.
I'll get a photo.
Yeah, get a photo. That's what he's gone like the full ET look. It's
I wouldn't say it looks like he's hacking some mainframe.
Yeah, he looks like he's doing B-roll for a current affairs show.
I've watched a lot of Swordfish last week.
Yeah, that's it. I hope you guys all enjoyed the hacker sequence. When Lockie first edited the hacker sequence from Swordfish, he only gave it like 2 seconds. Like, are you crazy? Watch that video. Give him at least 30 seconds of hacking. It's incredible. And by the way, we didn't play the audio because we didn't want to get copyright striked. But you should look up Swordfish hacking sequence or something. I think that's what it's called, hacking sequence.
The infamous Swordfish hacking sequence.
Yeah, watch the whole video because it is. I mean, while it was funny, the video without audio, with audio, it's so much funnier because once again, they're just trying to show hacking in some visual way. And the way Hugh Jackman was trying to communicate tension was by muttering under his breath, come on, yeah, come on, oh, no, oh, come on, yeah, almost there, yeah, you got it, come on, yeah. It's just so funny. I strongly recommend you watch the actual YouTube video. Okay, enough of that. This next topic I was only going to cover. I normally try and have a distinction between PEP and the show that shan't be named. But just because I know there's a lot of overlap in the audience, obviously, I wasn't going to cover this in Plain America at all. But then at the last second, we had a gap, and John saw me preparing this. He said, well, why don't you do that? I go, well, I'm doing this for PEP. He goes, dude, who pays your bills? Oh, fine. So I did do a bit of this in Plain as well, but I'm going to try and distinguish it. I've got a few extra bits here, but there is more overlap than I would like, to be honest. I wanted to talk about the Autopen controversy, which came and went in the course of a day. It all started with the Heritage Foundation's oversight project. They put out some research about Joe Biden's signature on Twitter. Some original research. They found that some documents showed an obviously handwritten signature. Like, for instance, when Biden dropped out of the race and when he pardoned Hunter Biden. But then a whole bunch of docs they found somewhere else had an absolutely identical signature. And that suggested they were signed by an Autopen. These included the pardons of Dr. Anthony Fauci, General Mark Milley, the January 6th committee, and the Biden family members. They all had the same signature, like identical. Here we are. This is their proof. They've laid the signatures over the top of each other, so you can see they're not messing around. Look at this. Dun-na. Okay. Now, of course, that doesn't really prove anything, but the New York Post reported that a former Biden staffer had corroborated that Biden was using an Autopen. But they didn't publish the staffer's name because they had no actual evidence of this, and other staffers also denied it. So that was quite responsible from the New York Post, except for they still ran their story. They just didn't name the person. But that was enough. That was enough for Trump to then jump on board, and he tweeted out the following. The pardons that Sleepy Joe Biden gave to the unselect committee of political thugs, I love that nickname, and many others are hereby declared. He loves hereby declared. I hereby declared, void, vacant, and of no further force or effect, because of the fact they were done by Autopen. In other words, Joe Biden did not sign them, but more importantly, he did not know anything about them. The necessary pardoning documents were not explained to or approved by Biden. He knew nothing about them, and the people that did may have committed a crime. Therefore, those on the unselect committee who destroyed and deleted all evidence obtained during their 2-year witch hunt of me and many other innocent people should fully understand that they are subject to investigation at the highest level. The fact is, they were probably responsible for the documents that were signed on their behalf without the knowledge or consent of the worst president in the history of our country, crooked Joe Biden. Okay, now, Trump's got no idea whether Biden knew about them or didn't know about them. He's just making that up. In, I might add, a fairly mentally unstable way of his own. But let's say the hatchet men did keep digging and they found proof that Biden not only didn't sign those documents, but one of his staffers used an Autopen instead. Is that pardon void or not? Because Trump, he thinks they are. You got any theories? What do you reckon?
I know the answer.
All right, well, let's start with the legislation. Actually, let's start with Constitution. Article 1, Section 7. Every bill which shall have passed the House of Representatives and the Senate shall, before it became a law, be presented to the President of the United States. If he approve, he shall sign it. But if not, he shall return it, with his objections to that House in which it shall have originated. Okay, so when he's signing a bill, he has to sign it. That's what the Constitution says, right? So what happens if one of his staffers uses an Autopen to sign it? According to Principal Deputy Attorney General Ed Whelan in 2002, he wrote, "You have asked whether the president will have signed a bill when a White House aide acting at the president's specific direction affixes the president's signature to the bill. We conclude the answer is yes." So they've looked into this exact question and they've said, yeah, that's not a problem. That's for a bill. When they say in the Constitution you have to sign it. Ed Whelan also said, "We do not believe that the requirement that the president sign a bill in order to manifest his approval of it requires that he personally put pen to paper. Rather, the word sign is expansive enough to include the meaning of cause the bill to bear the president's signature." So in other words, even a staffer using an Autopen is good for a bill's signature. And the standards for a bill in the Constitution are way higher than the standards for a pardon. The Constitution says you have to sign a bill. It doesn't say you have to sign a pardon. The 2005 OLC, the Office of Legal Counsel, reaffirmed this view. "We conclude the president need not personally perform the physical act of affixing his signature to a bill he approves and decides to sign in order for the bill to become law. Rather, the president may sign a bill within the meaning of Article 1, Section 7 by directing a subordinate to affix the president's signature to such a bill, for example, by Autopen." They specifically said Autopen. All right. In the case of pardons, this is what the Constitution says. The president shall have power to grant reprieves and pardons for offences against the United States, except in cases of impeachment. No mentions of signatures. The Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals in Rosamond versus Hudgens last year looked at this question, and they found, we readily determine that nothing in the Constitution restricts the president's exercise of the clemency power to commutations that have been rendered through a documented writing. To be sure, as a practical matter, a writing such as the clemency warrants President Trump signed for all other pardons and commutations granted throughout his presidency. This is an old Trump case that took a while. But such a clemency warrant, or indeed any writing, is not required for the president to exercise his authority under the Constitution. So they actually went way further. They said the pardon needn't even be written down. Never mind, doesn't have to be signed. It doesn't even have to be written down. You can just say a pardon. Don't be around a president and you sneeze, because then they might beg your pardon and then you go in all kinds of trouble. So Trump, in this case, allegedly commuted a prison sentence on the phone. The court said theoretically that's fine. A pardon doesn't need to be written down. So obviously, it doesn't need to be signed. Trump should know that. It's his precedent. One more important thing. According to the National Archives, the reason most of Biden's signatures in the Heritage Foundation dump look the same is because they replace the signatures with a graphics image of Biden's signature. It's just all the same image in their digital storage. That's how they do it. So that's an important point. So they saw a few pardons, the hard copies, and noticed they were signed properly. And then they saw the digital copies and said, oh, that's just all the same signature. It must be Autopen. But actually, those digital copies might have been of hard copies that were originally signed as well. We have no idea, because that's just how the National Archives work. That could be the reason why Trump is backtracking hard. Remember how Trump hereby declared that Biden's pardons are void, vacant, and of no further force or effect. Well, when asked whether the use of an Autopen would invalidate other presidential actions by Biden, Trump said, it's not my decision. That would be up to a court. But I would say that they're null and void, because I'm sure that Biden didn't have any idea that was taking place. So he knows he's full of shit. And by the way, if Biden was as senile as Trump suggested, that he had no idea what was going on, they wouldn't have needed an Autopen. They could just put a pardon underneath him in front of his desk and said, sign that. He was senile. Anyway, Carolyn Levitt also backed away from this. This is what she said there.
But the president was raising the point that, did the president even know about these pardons? Was his legal signature used without his consent or knowledge?
No, he wasn't making that point. But if he was, then prove it. That's my thought, Carolyn. I know you're a pepper. Either way, the whole thing's bullshit. So that's the end of this controversy. Do you have anything to add to the Autopen controversy?
Has anyone looked into whether it's legally valid to sign a bill with a Sharpie? Feels like it shouldn't be. It's one step above a crayon.
Take him to court. Now, some are making the case that this kind of outburst from Trump is evidence that he's going a bit senile. I saw a number of people online suggesting that. I disagree. I don't think that was senility. I think that was desperation. And just trolling. He's just trolling. He just likes to troll. But I am starting to wonder about Trump on a completely separate note, especially with the 51st state stuff with Canada. He seems to be really serious about that, and that is just nuts. But I am starting to think there is better evidence out there of his mental state, and I have brought it for you today. Number one, Exhibit A. This is Trump's answer to a question about whether Trump was planning to lower corporate taxes to match Ireland's corporate tax rate. Okay, that's the question. Just marvel at the journey we go on and where we end up. The starting point is Trump going to lower corporate taxes to match Ireland's corporate tax rate? Just observe the ending point.
To Metro Island, are you planning to lower corporate taxes to Metro Island?
Well, we are planning to lower taxes, yeah, if the Democrats behave, but the Democrats have no clue. You saw that the other night during the speech. 2 young women were slaughtered by illegal aliens. 1 young man has very serious cancer and many other problems. We look at the people up there, they all had difficulty, very serious difficulty. But when we're talking about 2 young girls, beautiful young girls, Lake and Riley, you know the whole story. That evening was a disaster for the Democrats, in my opinion. And I would mention, and I'd see 2 mothers that were inconsolable as they stood, crying. Their daughters have been absolutely just destroyed, killed, viciously killed. And the young man who loves the police departments, he had cancer and has cancer, very bad cancer. There wasn't from people sitting there, Democrats, there wasn't a hand clap, nobody stood, they were just stone-faced. These people are sick, there's something wrong with them. There was no standing for anybody. The only thing they liked is when they heard about the death taking place with Ukraine. They were happy about that. They were happy about that. Pocahontas was very happy. She's the one that was slapped. That's why I looked at her. I said, oh, it's Pocahontas. These people are sick. They don't know what's happening in the real world. The Democrats have to get their act together. And if they don't vote, then what you're going to do is you're going to have taxes that are going to go through the roof. You're going to have a very bad time. You're going to have some very bad things happen. And people are going to blame the Democrats. And Schumer is a Palestinian, as far as I'm concerned. He's become a Palestinian. He used to be Jewish. He's not Jewish anymore. He's a Palestinian. Okay.
Huh? Chuck Schumer's Palestinian? What's that got to do with Ireland's corporate tax rate? What the hell? People are giving him crap. They're going, oh, that's a bit racist, isn't it? That's a bit racist. Or you call it Palestine. What's that? What's going on there? I just want to ask, what the hell is going on in your brain? Where did that come from? Chuck Schumer is Palestinian. Anyway, there's a worse example. There's a worse example I have for you. Now, I'm going to tell a story first, and I'll give you a warning. I'm going to remind you about Trump's water obsession. You need to know the full story to appreciate this. Trump's been obsessed for years with the fact that California was diverting water from some farmland in the Central Valley to maintain a delta. And one of the many reasons they were trying to preserve the water flow in that delta was because of an endangered fish in the delta smelt. But this was mainly, if we're being honest, a story about environmental regulations versus a bunch of farmers. Because the water was farmers' water from the Central Valley, okay? So it's a question of, is the water going to the farmers in the Central Valley or is it going to the Delta? Cut to the LA fires years later. And Trump insists that the reason they had no water was because of that fish. He said that so many times. Totally not true. LA had no water because their water system couldn't deal with the demand during the fire. The water in the Central Valley doesn't go to LA. It stays in the valley. That's how valleys work. It goes to local farmland in the valley. But Trump insisted if they would only turn on the faucet, and yes, he used that term, turn on the faucet in the Central Valley, it would stop the fires. He said that over and over again. And it became weirder because then he claimed to have done it. He claimed the army somehow broke in and turned on the faucet, and that fixed everything. And he demanded California thank him for this action. In reality, what happened? It was an army engineer requested that the water in the Central Californian reservoir was released. But it was just released into the local farmland because that's where that water gets released. This is water that they didn't need because it was the middle of winter and it was raining. They didn't need any more water. But that water is supposed to be stored for the summer and they were releasing the water that was going to be used in the next drought. And so the farmers were getting quite pissed off, going, why are you destroying our next crop by releasing all this water? And so the army then just said, oh, yeah, we will stop that. And after 4 days and 2 billion wasted gallons, they turned the flow of water off. Now none of that water went anywhere other than the Central Valley. None of it went to LA. So that is what happened, okay? So that's the reality. Now you understand the background. But Trump tweeted out this picture the next day, which he says is of California. Other people say is of Vermont. We're not sure. It's either in California or in Vermont. I don't really care. He says, photo of beautiful water flow that I just opened in California. Today, 1.6 billion gallons, and in 3 days it'll be 5.2 billion gallons. Everyone should be happy about this long-fought victory. I only wish they listened to me 6 years ago. There would have been no fire. No, there would have been a fire. That tweet is weird and embarrassing, but a month later, he's still at it. There's your background. So, I'm now warning you, I'm going to play you Trump's whole answer, even though it goes for 4.5 minutes. If you don't want to hear someone sundowning, I advise you skip forward 4.5 minutes. But if you enjoy that kind of thing, well, sit back, get yourself a can of Fanta, let's go. He's asked whether he'll be negotiating with the Democrats over a shutdown. That's the starting point. Will you negotiate with the Democrats over a shutdown? Good luck, Peppers.
We're looking at an impending government shutdown Friday midnight.
Yeah.
Democrats for 30 years straight have said if there's a shutdown, bad things happen. Do you anticipate direct negotiations yourself with conference leader of the Democrats, Chuck Schumer?
If they need me, I'm there 100%. It's right now it's 2 or 3 people. If it shuts down, it's not the Republicans' fault. You know, we passed a bill where we had an incredible Republican vote. We only had 1 negative vote, a grandstander, you know, 1 grandstander. There's always a grandstander in the lot. But it was amazing. People were amazed that the Republicans were able to vote in unison like that, so strongly. If there's a shutdown, even the Democrats admit it'll be their fault. And I'm hearing a lot of Democrats are going to vote for it, and I hope they do. This is an extension. But ultimately, we want to vote for one big, beautiful bill where we put the taxes in, we put everything in. We're going to have big tax cuts. We're going to have tremendous incentives for companies coming into our country and employing lots of people. It'll be, I called it, in a rare moment, one big, beautiful bill. That's what I like, and it seems to be that's where they're heading. And we'll have to take care of something to do with Los Angeles. A place called Los Angeles almost burned to the ground. By the way, I broke into Los Angeles. Can you believe it? I had a break-in. I invaded Los Angeles, and we opened up the water, and the water is now flowing down. They have so much water, they don't know what to do. They were sending it out to the Pacific for environmental reasons. Okay, can you believe it? And in the meantime, they lost 25,000 houses. They lost, and nobody's ever seen anything like it. But we have the water. I'd love to show you a picture. You've seen the picture. The water is flowing through the half pipes. You know, we have the big half pipes that go down. 25 years ago, they used to have plenty of water, but they turned it off for environmental reasons. Well, I turned it on for environmental reasons and also fire reasons. But and I've been asking them to do that during my first term. I said, do it. I didn't think anything could happen like this, but they didn't have enough water. Now the farmers are going to have water for their land, and the water is in there. But I actually had to break in. We broke in to do it because we had people that were afraid to give water. They were, in particular, they were trying to protect a certain little fish. And I said, how do you protect a fish if you don't have water? They didn't have any water, so they're protecting a fish. And that didn't work out too well, by the way. So they have a lot of water going down throughout California, all coming out from the Pacific Northwest, even some from Canada. Thank you, Canada, very much. I appreciate it. Next thing you know, they'll want to turn the water off. They want to charge us for the water. But it comes up from the Pacific Northwest, and it's a beautiful thing to see. I mean, it is brimming with water. Now, if they would have had that done, you wouldn't have had the damage because the fire would have been put out. The fire hydrants would have been loaded. The sprinklers in people's living rooms and bedrooms would have been loaded up with water. They had no water. The government makes them put sprinklers, and they had no water in the sprinklers because they had no water. So the water is flowing, and we're going to have to give a lot of money to Los Angeles to help them. And the Democrats are going to want to do that. So that's the one thing different. And frankly, I think that makes it a lot easier. But one of the big thing is we have the big, beautiful bill. We got to get that done. And that will put our country in a position like it's never been. It's a reduction of taxes. It's tremendous incentives for companies to come from all over the world into our country. It's great environmentally, but it's not this environmental scam that we went through, that we all went through. It provides for everything. It's a big, beautiful bill, and I hope we can get it approved, and that'll be next. But in the meantime, we have the continuing resolution, and the Republicans have approved it, and now the Democrats have to approve it, and I hope they will. And I think a lot of them, I can tell you, they want to. I've spoken to some of them. They really want to. Their leadership may not want them to. And if it closes, it's purely on the Democrats.
Wow. The incredible distance between that and reality. The sheer confusion. The amazing irrelevance of that completely wrong anecdote to the question that was asked. It is tough. That in my view, is Mad King stuff. What do you reckon, Melina?
Can't disagree. I do think it's so much harder. We talked about this peek behind the curtain privately the other day, but it's harder to judge decline with Trump because he's so on TV all the time. And when you're seeing someone he's very old, so it makes sense. Like, everyone declines at that age. So there would be, and if you look at clips from him of 4 or 8 years ago, it's quite different. But when you're seeing someone all the time and they're just progressively declining, it's less obvious because he's always said crazy shit. He's always rambled and gone on weird tangents and stuff. He says it's like some special, sophisticated speaking style when he's pressed on it.
The weave, he called it.
Yeah. Whereas in contrast with Biden, they tried to hide him away because he wasn't looking great, but it meant that when he did do that terrible debate performance, it was all the more shocking because we hadn't seen that much of him. So when you see him, when you see anybody who's getting old, when there's been a long gap, you usually get a shock by how much they've aged. Whereas if you see them every day, you don't really notice because it is gradual, both physically and mentally. And so in that sense, Trump does himself a favor by talking shit on TV every day, and Biden and his people did himself quite a disservice by hiding away.
I completely agree. Completely agree. I mean, I was making that point at the time. So they should have listened to me. I don't have anything to add. Oh, yeah, I will say this. You might want to bookmark that. You might want to bookmark this podcast. The next time someone asks you, whether Trump is, for proof that Trump might not be all there, you play them that. But first, explain the water thing to them. You need to understand the water thing, because otherwise you just go, oh, he's just talking some shit, whatever. But when you realize just how insane the water thing is, and how worked up he is about it, and how he's working it into a shutdown discussion, that's pretty special. Anyway, now if you're watching the video, you'll have noticed that we just put in a bit of a white flash because we just took a little bit of an actual toilet break, not a metaphorical toilet break. Before we start the next subject, I suddenly remembered there is one more thing that I am very grateful for, which once again is revealing a lot about my personality, a little too much. I enjoy watching very, very, very bad movies. I've enjoyed it my entire life. I've told you guys before about how much I used to like ninja movies. I was just a doyen of the video store. The $1 videos, I couldn't get enough of them. And there is a certain kind of bad movie that has sprung up in the internet era. And there aren't many examples of these. One that's very famous is Trapped in the Closet by R. Kelly, which was basically what they did was it was a series of 3-minute videos for social media that were then put together in one long movie. Like that one there was about 2.5 hours when you put them all together. And they're just terrible. They're just so bad. Like most of it was sung, but it was just hilarious. I do recommend at one point in time You Chasing Down Trapped in the Closet if you haven't seen it before, but it is quite famous. What isn't so famous, but I boldly predict is about to be, is something that just came out in the last month or two, which is a series of, once again, another serial, these dramatic serials on TikTok called Move Over, I'm the Final Boss. And I had great trouble preparing this Pep because I just had to watch the whole 90 minutes of Move Over, I'm the Final Boss. Now, of course, someone's put them all together on YouTube. If you look it up on YouTube, you'll see the 90-minute version there. I'll put it in the homework. You need to do your homework this week, Peppers. And your homework is to watch the entire movie experience of Move Over, I'm the Final Boss. So we got a little bit here. We just queued up a random part, okay? This is not special. Let's go.
So quit acting like a clown and embarrassing yourself.
Low-life peasant like you makes me sick. Thankfully, my Hannah already cut ties with you.
You've insulted my father, too. You're dead meat. Security! You insolent fool! How dare you speak to him like that? Dad, what was that for? Get out of my way, you idiot.
Dear Lord, Mr. Douglas Sr. is raging. He wants to destroy Kingsley himself.
It's so good. It's so good. I mean, just a random moment. And you saw how good that was. You needed no context. The acting, the scripting, the music.
Hi, Lachlan here. I can't see Melina's face. Is she as giddy as you are, Chaz?
You love it, don't you, Melina? You love it.
It's good content.
It's great content. Lockie, do not pretend you're not watching this in the lockbox instead of the Pep. Oh my God, this is so good. The best thing about these serials, it's just the same thing over and over again. Nothing ever happens. It's so good. Anyway, so I strongly recommend, I could not recommend any higher. Move Over, I'm the Final Boss in the homework. Now, Melina, I don't know if you were about to talk about that or something else, but you can talk about whatever you want now.
Yeah, now that you've lightened the mood for everyone, I'm going to bring it right back down with this next topic on USAID. So the New York Times recently did a in-depth piece combining on-the-ground reporting and statistical analysis to get a sense of the effect of DOGE's cuts to USAID and the effects that they're having on the ground right now, as well as using the statistical analysis to look at the effects it might have over the next 12 months. Elon has said, quote, "No one has died as a result of a brief pause to do a sanity check on foreign aid funding. No one." That is not true. So New York Times did on-the-ground reporting in South Sudan, talking to people who were involved in USAID programs, and they documented specific children in South Sudan who have died already after programs were shuttered and the medications, particularly keeping AIDS orphans alive, stopped being distributed. South Sudan is one of the poorest countries in the world. And the line between life and death in these kinds of countries is so fine, especially for people who already have conditions like HIV. So they detailed a number of specific cases. It's worth reading the article, but one was a case of an 8-year-old girl who was infected with HIV at birth, and she had been kept alive her whole life because of American assistance. And in January, she lost her ID card, and there was no longer a caseworker to help her get a new card and medicines that the card is needed for because of the DOGE cuts, and she became sick with infections and died. The cost of first-line HIV medications to keep a person alive in these countries is 12 cents a day.
Jesus.
That's how much money it would have cost to keep this little girl alive. Like, that's a real person, a real child, and she's not the only one. They detailed others. The reporter also met with staff members of a not-profit that provided emergency high nutrition paste to save the lives of children with severe acute malnutrition. That program was ended last month as well, and the reporter witnessed children in the village who are starving right now because there is no food aid anymore. South Sudan's also a destination for refugees fleeing
Sorry, can I just jump in? This you may say this eventually, but just in case you're not, I've read a different article about that exact high protein paste, and I can tell you, is just sitting on a dock in America, rotting. Like they've made it. It's there, but since they just defunded the program, no one's eating it. They don't eat it in America.
Yeah.
So it's just they've literally got enough there to support millions of people just rotting away on the dock.
Yeah.
Yeah, go on.
South Sudan's also a destination for refugees fleeing the war in Sudan. There's a very brutal civil war happening right now in Sudan, arguably the worst humanitarian crisis in the world right now. And there are programs that USAID was running to prevent girls being trafficked as they're fleeing the violence, and also to treat is sadly very common for women to get sexually assaulted as they're fleeing by rebels and soldiers. And there are programs in South Sudan to treat women who have made it across the border but have been sexually assaulted while escaping, treating them for STIs, HIV, preventative medicine. Those programs have also been abandoned, so now those rape survivors are also abandoned and on their own. The article also modelled how many people might die from a range of conditions within a year without American foreign aid. And they estimated 1.65 million people could die within a year without aid for HIV prevention and treatment. This is without the US aid specifically. 500,000 could die within a year without funding for vaccines. 550,000 could die without funding for food aid. 290,000 could die without funding for malaria prevention, and 310,000 could die without funding for tuberculosis prevention. And in the case of tuberculosis, it's so short-sighted because an increase in cases, which will certainly happen as a result of this, means that cases are more likely to reach the US, where a single case of extensively drug-resistant TB can cost $500,000 to manage. Which is to say, it's much cheaper to prevent the spread of disease in poor countries than it is to treat cases of disease in rich countries.
That's true.
So when you're trying to save money, this is not a great way to go about it. And you wanted to say something about TB as well, I remember.
I did. Yeah, I did. Because I've been reading a bit about this, actually. That there's a lot of concern about TB at the moment. You referred in passing to drug-resistant TB. This is an issue. In a recent survey in 31 countries, 1 in 4 organisations providing TB care have shut down. About half have stopped screening for new cases of TB, of tuberculosis. So hundreds of thousands of people with tuberculosis have just been cut off from testing and medicine. And that's entirely because of USAID shutting down, right? Because about half of all international donor funding for tuberculosis treatment comes from the US, almost entirely from USAID. All right. So here's the problem. That's just background. The problem is that not only is tuberculosis deadly if left untreated, but it spreads real fast. The average untreated case of active tuberculosis spreads infection to 10 to 15 people a year, that is. And the world happens to be battling the spread of exactly what you just said, multi-drug resistant tuberculosis. It's becoming a huge problem right now. So the last thing you want is to give tuberculosis a free kick and allow it to spread at a time when it's evolving rapidly to be untreatable right now. One of Nicholas Enrich's projections, he's the guy you're talking about there, was that multi-drug resistant tuberculosis cases will grow by 30% in the next few years because of the USAID cutting. All right. There was a vaccine in late stage trials and a new diagnostic test, both getting close to completion, that were being funded by USAID. They have both just been terminated. Also, like with PEPFAR, and the paste, there is apparently tuberculosis medicine just sitting in a warehouse in Africa being unused by patients as well, slowly going off again. So we have a situation where the world is on the precipice of either sorting out tuberculosis once and for all, or potentially tipping over into a situation where it actually gets out of control, even for Western countries. So that's just untreatable. And we're picking door B right now. Now, that's not the reason why the USAID needs to be open. They can fund that by some other means. I'm not saying, you need to have a $60 billion agency to fund a few $1 million of tuberculosis funding. Just do the funding. That's all I'm saying. Like, there are, I don't know how many little problems like this are hidden in the USAID situation, but there's probably a few. But I just want to just spotlight the one I'm having nightmares about, and it's that one. So, fully drug-resistant tuberculosis may be coming to a first world country near you because of this. Go for it.
Awesome. A little update as well. A federal judge just ordered this week for DOGE to halt its efforts to slash the agency, although it didn't rule out future cuts as long as they're undertaken by USAID. This is not going to make a lot of difference because the contracts have already been cancelled. The staff have already been let go. Like those supply lines, that knowledge, that expertise, those relationships, that's gone. It's not coming back. Yeah. And I really reading this article and just obviously when you hear specific stories of people, the fact that children are dying right now because Elon Musk decided to cut aid first and ask questions later. It's hard to put into words how obscene that is. As you say, you can cut aspects of USAID if you do it in a cautious, methodical manner. Yeah. But if you just toss out everything and then say, we'll fix the problems later, people are literally dying in the meantime while you decide if their lives are worth saving or not.
The most frustrating thing about it is the reason he's doing it is because of just a dude he follows on Twitter. There's a guy, Mike Benz, who's obsessed with USAID. He has been for years. And I could piss all over Mike Benz if I wanted to. I know a few stories about Mike Benz. But I'm not going to because it's not about Mike Benz. My point is, Elon with his Twitter brain, just when there's someone he follows who gets really excited about something, Elon just unquestioningly just follows along. He just buys it. And that's having serious world effects now. Twitter weirdos is having worldwide effects.
Yes. Yeah, and I do think, there is a real, I'm sure that's true, that's where he's getting the idea from, but there is also a real callousness in the way that Elon operates that I find genuinely scary given the amount of power he's accumulated, particularly within the government. He is the richest man on earth and he's begrudging children 12 cents a day to save their lives. And kids are literally dying. Children are dying because of that, which is just, it's hard to put into words how disgusting that is. It just is. And I do feel like there's a pattern, look, you can never get into people's heads completely and understand all their motivations and where they're coming from. But he does have a pattern of actions that paints a picture of someone who wants to hide away from humanity in a bubble of wealth, protected from the rest of the world and all that people suffer. Moving from South Africa to the US and pursuing a nationalist attitude that America should only help Americans when he was not even born in America himself. The fact that he's built a compound in Texas to house all of the families that he's seemingly estranged from the marauding masses in America that are poor. His obsession with going to Mars. That plan B is not for all of us, I can assure you. That is not a plan to save humanity from climate change. That's a plan to save a very select group of elite people from the planet while the rest of us burn up. And I think that people did give Elon the benefit of the doubt for a long time because they attributed an altruistic motive to him in founding Tesla. The electric cars are good for the world. Elon makes electric cars. It must be because he cares about doing good things in the world. And I think that's wrong. I think there's plenty of evidence at this point that that's wrong. He was non-ideological enough back then to believe in climate science. He saw a gap in the market, he filled it with a product, and he became the richest man in the world. Good for him, but we shouldn't assume that he did that for the benefit of humanity. If he was motivated by wanting to save the planet rather than making money, why is he happy to see electric car subsidies removed now? If his agenda is to get as many people as possible in electric cars to save the planet, why is he happy to see his competitors get crushed under a Trump regime that doesn't subsidize the companies that still need subsidies just because Tesla is fine?
It's a good question.
He said, take away the subsidies, it will only help Tesla.
That's true.
Take away the thing that helps the environment, I only want to help myself. That is his mentality. I think we see evidence of it in so many parts of his decision-making, his public discourse, the way he operates in government. I think he is a truly callous influence on the government and therefore the world at the moment, and it does scare me.
I'll tell you what, I'm sure Chase, by the way, our correspondent, is enjoying this conversation.
Great engineer, terrible person.
There we go. There's the nuance. There's the nuance, Chase. I'll tell you what Elon reminds me of a little bit. I don't make a lot of literary references because I haven't read a book in about 40 years. But he reminds me a bit of The Great Gatsby, Nick and Daisy, the careless people who just smash shit up and let other people clean it up afterwards. And just like they're not malign. They're not trying to cause suffering. They just couldn't give a shit. They're just living their gay life in the old sense of the word. Like just happily, indifferently, just going to parties and just having great times. Daisy in particular, I'm thinking about there, and they just smash people to pieces without even knowing or caring, and then move on to the next party. And Elon reminds me a little bit of that, except for he doesn't go to parties. He just forms companies and has children.
Yeah, I do think also when you're specifically like taking time away from your job to go in and smash up things that are designed to help other people who are way, way poorer than you, I think that is malign. I don't think that you can just plead ignorance. I mean, in Great Gatsby, they're just kind of being jerks to each other. They're not like going out and taking away money from the poor and letting them die and continue even after there's evidence that that's happening, And I do think like it's particularly cruel the way they have shuttered things at USAID so rapidly and thoughtlessly, because he basically guarantees that people will die before alternatives can be put in place. Like a lot of these locations are really hard to get to. And if you shut down established supply lines, clinics, relationships with locals, you can't immediately step in and take them over. If you said to me, like if you asked me to give 12 cents a day to keep that girl alive, I'd pay it. I can afford 12 cents a day. But that's not an option. It's not as simple as just finding someone else to put up the money. So even as people talk about, China coming in and taking advantage of the gap that America's leaving, which they may well do, which will probably not be to America's interests, it's just not as simple as, oh, America's not paying, someone else will pay. Like, even if that happens eventually, people are going to die in the meantime, like, and at an increasingly rapid clip because, like, especially with things like HIV, like it takes a little while for, you run out of the drugs, the stockpiles go down, then you're suddenly susceptible to infections and you get the infection, then the infection kills you. That doesn't happen right away, but it's going to start happening a lot more. And they've done it in a way that guarantees that that's going to happen, where even if they were like, this isn't our problem, this isn't our priority, we're ending aid, there still would have been a less awful way to do it than the way they did it, which is the most awful way you could possibly do it.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree. Sounds like you've come to the end of that.
Well, one other point I'd just make is that again, the whole point of DOGE is supposed to be saving money. The whole point of USAID is to advance US interests through soft power, which is much cheaper on a worldwide basis than fighting wars. You can't fight a war in every single country in the world. And this is a pretty cost-effective way, 0.24% of the federal budget, to garner goodwill and cooperation throughout the world. And he just either doesn't know or doesn't care, and that's really unfortunate.
Yeah, he doesn't believe it. He thinks, oh look, I mean, maybe he's got me conned, but I think he genuinely believes that the shit that Mike Benz tells him, that it's just all just lefty causes and corruption and that I think he thinks it funds wars. I think he thinks it creates. It's about the USAID is like a slush fund for the World Economic Forum to make everyone eat bugs and to crush the working man and just all this bullshit. I think that's what he actually thinks. I read plenty of people who do think that, who genuinely think that, and I don't think Elon Musk is any better than those people, even though he might think he's better than those people. I don't. So it's I just on that, the Doge saving money thing. I just wanted to give you a little bit of an update on that because this is a bit of a change of direction that slightly less bitter as a topic. So it's nice just to change the tone slightly there, but it's about the wall of receipts, which I'm quite fond of, as Peppers would know. Last week, Doge reported they'd saved $115 billion through a combination of asset sales, contract lease cancellations and renegotiations, fraud and improper payment deletion, grant cancellations, interest savings, programmatic changes, regulatory savings, and workforce reductions. Now, to be clear, they're 2 months down out of 18 months. So you do the maths. They're tracking at about $1 trillion worth of cuts if they keep going at that rate, which they won't because it's easier at the beginning than at the end. But let's say they do. That's not the $2 trillion projected deficit that he was going for, or projected savings to cut the deficit, even before the extra tax cuts that are about to come through from Trump. But as always, the wall of receipts isn't quite legit. They put $37.5 billion on the wall of receipts out of that $115 billion. But all they put up was some contract terminations, some lease terminations, and some grant terminations. And not with all the federal identification numbers either. So often they weren't checkable. Thankfully, though, the New York Times went back to the source code and they could identify the relevant receipts from the source code. What did they find? Glad you asked, Peppers. At least 5 of the 20 largest savings appeared to be exaggerated. Like, for instance, they're claiming $1.9 billion of IRS tech support that was actually terminated by Biden. And they're claiming a $1.75 billion USAID grant to the Gavi Vaccine Alliance when the entire grant had already been spent. So they saved zero. What about the other 2/3 of savings? Doge says part of the remaining $77 billion is from workforce reductions. And there'd be a lot of them, to be fair, but a lot of them are also still in court. But at the end of the day, only $12.5 billion of the $37.5 billion was actually verifiable. So who knows how much of the $115 billion is a real savings or not? I don't know. But this is why I'm telling you the story. It's not just for the numbers. How did Doge respond to this news from the New York Times, do you think? Would you like to guess?
Ignoring it.
That's a predictable way, you'd think. No, they did not. They deleted the ID numbers from the source code, so now no one can check their numbers.
Transparency.
These are the most transparent people on earth, apparently. The most transparent agency ever. Going out of their way to make their declarations uncheckable. That's the best part. It's not that they just took off the wall of receipts, because that would be not transparent, but at least it would be authentically and honestly not transparent. But no, they want to keep the illusion of transparency without actually being transparent. So they left all the numbers there so all the Musk fanboys can harass you on Twitter going, look, they put them all up there, have a look, they're right there. But at the same time be completely uncheckable, so they're meaningless. That's the kind of thing that annoys me as a stats nerd. So I take personal offense at that. I've got one more Doge thing. Any other Doge stuff you want to talk about? Okay. This is another classic story. Apparently Doge forced their way into the US Institute for Peace. Now, this took a few days because the US IP insisted that they're not actually part of the executive branch at all. They are a congressionally funded independent agency. So DOGE didn't have the right to just bust in. They kept DOGE out for days. But then DOGE came back with the DC police and booted them out. They got the police to boot them out. DOGE has broken into our building, said the organisation's CEO as he got booted out as well. George Moose, what a great name, George Moose. You might wonder how that happened. How did George get booted out? How did the actual workers get booted out and DOGE brought in by the police? What happened there? It turns out the DC police were contacted by the US Attorney of Washington, D.C. Do you know who that is?
The Eagle.
Let me answer the question with a brand new sting from Dan.
The Eagle's Nest.
Some of your best work, Dan. Some of your least musical work, but your best quality work. I love it. Thanks, Dan. Eagle Ed Martin Jr. Now, for those who didn't listen to PEP 200, you should go back and listen to that. He is the biggest hack in the administration filled with hacks. And his office told the DC police there'd been a disturbance at the US Institute of Peace offices and that some intruders or trespassers were refusing to leave. The police were told the boss there was this guy, and they gave a name. He was the guy that Trump had chosen to take over with DOGE. They said, that's the boss. So the police turn up, they talk to him, and they force the US IP staff to leave because they think they're the intruders. And then DOGE come in and take over. And then the new guy comes in, throws out all the other US IP employees, and they lock the door. So the Eagle landed all over their face.
The Eagle's Nest.
Okay. Do you have anything else to say about Doge, Melina?
No, just enjoying that sting. It's good timing.
It's great. Okay. All right. I'm probably going to fill the rest of this podcast with this section. This is what this podcast is named after. The Flight Club. This is the alien enemy sack section. What is? Just jump in whenever you want, Melina, because I'm just going to go. What is the Alien Enemies Act? When you start with immigration, I never stop. What is the Alien Enemies Act? The Alien Enemies Act of 1798 gives the president tremendous authority to target and remove immigrants. He's given the power to detain or remove, quote, all natives, citizens, denizens, or subjects of the hostile nation or government being of the age of 14 years and upward, who shall be within the United States and not actually naturalized, so not citizens of America, that is. It even allows the president to detain and deport legal immigrants with little or no due process. And those migrants it detains and removes are processed under wartime authority. So conventional immigration law does not apply. It's a great way to get shit done fast if you say aren't deporting enough people. Wasn't my timing last week fantastic when I told you guys about how Trump was getting really desperate about the fact he wasn't deporting enough people and he was going to try something radical soon? Whoa! It took like 2 days for that to come true. It was originally part of a suite of laws called the Alien and Sedition Acts. All of them were shockingly authoritarian. The other laws have been repealed, but this one remains on the books. It's only been used 3 times in history, well, in 3 periods of history. There were a lot of times in each of those periods. In the War of 1812, in World War I, and World War II. It's only supposed to be used in the middle of serious wars. Does the Alien Enemies Act apply now? Okay, let's go through it. The Alien Enemies Act allows detention and removal of migrants only when, quote, there is a declared war between the United States and any foreign nation or government, or any invasion or predatory incursion is perpetrated, attempted, or threatened against the territory of the United States by any foreign nation or government. Okay, so three things: a war, an invasion, or an incursion. They're the three times you can use it. Trump insists they all apply right now, as you can see here.
Criticism that the Alien Enemies Act has only been invoked 3 other times. They were all during times of war. Do you feel that you're using it appropriately right now?
Well, this is a time of war because Biden allowed millions of people, many of them criminals, many of them at the highest level. They emptied jails out. Other nations emptied their jails into the United States. That's an invasion. And these are criminals, many, many criminals, murderers, drug dealers at the highest level, drug lords, people from mental institutions. That's an invasion.
Geez, he loves the appeal from mental institutions. I wonder if there's one person in America who came from a mental institution in one of these countries. He loves it. Anyway, so he signs an executive order that made the following very convincing argument that America is being invaded. Allow me to quote the argument in full. The result is a hybrid criminal state that is perpetrating an invasion of and predatory incursion into the United States, and which poses a substantial danger to the United States. What I just read you just then was literally the first time they mentioned the word invasion or predatory incursion in the executive order. He just flat out asserts it. That's it. Just says it is an invasion. It is an incursion. That's it. In court, they offered an extraordinarily low bar for what an invasion could be defined as. Melina, I want you to try, off the top of your head, come up with the most pathetic possible definition of an invasion. Try. Just imagine you're the Trump administration. You're the Department of Justice. Try and come up with the laxest possible definition of invasion that you think you could get away with in a court of law. Go for it.
Anytime someone comes into the country illegally.
That is too high a standard, Melina Wicks. You are not going to get a job at the DOJ. This is their definition of an invasion. Because you insisted it had to be illegal. The arrival somewhere of people or things who are not wanted there. That is an invasion. That is an invasion that they can declare war powers for. Let me read it again. The arrival somewhere of people or things who are not wanted there. So by that definition, a fart is an invasion. A door-knocking Mormon is an invasion. Rain is an invasion if you're playing cricket. Okay? It's the arrival of people or things who are not wanted there. Now, most lawyers are of the view that that is complete bullshit. Illegal migration and cross-border drug smuggling don't qualify as an invasion or predatory incursions. If they did, then America has been invaded for the entire drug war for the last 50 years. But it doesn't end there. That's just one part of the legislation that is extremely problematic for Trump's definitions. I left out the other part, which is the act of war or invasion or predatory incursion has to be by a foreign nation or government. Who's the foreign nation or government invading America right now? Please call out. I was being metaphorical, but if you are at home calling out a country, put it in the comments because I'd love to know. There clearly isn't one. But Trump has been a bit tricky here. He's declaring the Venezuelan gang Trendaragua as the invading country. Now, they've already declared them a terrorist organization in America. I don't think they're a terrorist organization, but let's leave that aside. They wrote in the same executive order I just read you before, Over the years, Venezuelan national and local authorities have ceded ever greater control over their territories to transnational criminal organisations, including TDA. The result is a hybrid criminal state that is perpetrating an invasion of and predatory incursion into the United States, and which poses a substantial danger to the United States. Evidence irrefutably demonstrates that TDA, I shouldn't say TDA, it makes me think of TNA, which just seems inappropriate. But anyway, TDA has invaded the United States and continues to invade, attempt to invade, and threaten to invade the country, perpetrated irregular warfare within the country, and used drug trafficking as a weapon against our citizens. Okay, so they say Trendaragua is not simply allied with the government. They effectively are the Venezuelan government, they say. So there's your foreign nation or government. Now, look, I don't think that's as spurious as the invasion bit. I think that's spurious. But, I'm no expert on Venezuelan geopolitics. Maybe they are entwined. I mean, seems unlikely, but at least they had a go. At least they had a go there, which they didn't really have a go, the invasion. They just asserted that. But anyway, in court, they've also argued TDA also operates as a de facto government in the areas in which they're operating. Yeah, okay, maybe not. I don't know. But the point is, this bunch of criminals and drug smugglers are now somehow redefined as an invading army, according to the Trump administration. So once again, quite unconvincing to legal thinkers, but they're running with it. Here's Steve Miller.
The statute delineates 3 criteria for triggering the Alien Enemies Act. One is an act of war, which, by the way, an invasion is an act of war, but put that aside. One is an invasion, which this is. One is a predatory incursion, which this is. So it actually meets all 3 statutory criteria, but with respect to this particular statute, the proclamation is utilizing the incursion and invasion language in the statute.
You can tell he's pretty proud of this. I reckon he's the one who came up with this bullshit. Anyway, it's interesting that the government's position is that they declared an invasion, an act of war, 2 months ago, and then did nothing for 2 months before acting on this invasion, an act of war. Doesn't sound very invasion-y to me. If my country was being invaded, I'd probably act on it immediately. But different strokes. Just to be clear, no one in history, literally no one in history, has ever interpreted this act to mean anything like this. This contradicts all originalist doctrines. If this gets to the Supreme Court, and it will, I expect them to recognise that. We'll see how much they disappoint me. But no, I expect them to rule against this in a big way. But this does mean they can't use this doctrine for just any Venezuelan. They've got to prove the deportee is a member of Trendaragua because that's the nation that's invaded them. Okay. An interesting dog that hasn't barked yet. Well, all dogs are interesting. but this one hasn't barked yet. This is Trump's actual position from his inauguration speech. Have a listen to this.
By invoking the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, I will direct our government to use the full and immense power of federal and state law enforcement to eliminate the presence of all foreign gangs and criminal networks, bringing devastating crime to U.S. soil, including our cities and inner cities.
Now, that might just washed over your head a little bit. He does that when he gets in his sing-song voice. Did you pick up the interesting part of that little grab there, Melina?
No, don't think so.
No, I don't blame you. It wasn't interesting, but there was a bit that jumped out at me. Eliminate all foreign gangs. That's an interesting word, isn't it? All. Not Trendaragua. All. This is not going to be the last gang that he declares an invasion from. I mean, why would he stop? If he can run his bullshit once, why not run it many times? Are you telling me that if you're running the argument that Trendaragua is intertwined with the government of Venezuela and so therefore as a nation, you're not going to run the same argument with Mexican cartels? They actually are intertwined with the Mexican government. They literally are. So the Sinaloa cartel, that's next, for sure, for absolute sure. And then there's a whole bunch of others. I mean, if you're going to run this bullshit, you can run on any gang. Apparently, America has been invaded by lots of gangs simultaneously. There's lots of invasions. Wow, dark times in America. He wants to use this authoritarian war power as anti-crime legislation. That's what he wants to do. And I don't think this is going to stop with gangs either. He can declare any group of migrants an invading army if he wants to, and then he can subject them to war powers. And war powers, by the way, apply to citizens as well. If you are going to declare a state of war, you can detain citizens indefinitely. You don't have habeas corpus anymore if you're in a war. Habeas corpus, I don't want to go into too much detail, but it means that you can just detain people however you like for whatever reason if you don't have habeas corpus. If the Supreme Court lets him get away with this, and I'm sure they're not going to, Christ, please don't let them get away with this. If they do, America is a police state. You know I don't like overstating shit like that. It's a fact, though. If Trump is allowed to just detain anyone anytime he likes and do whatever he likes to any migrant, it will be a police state. And he's not going to go by halves either. This is the way he works. He pushes, and if you don't push him back, he pushes more. He never stops pushing. How much has he pushed in the last 2 months? He's got 46 more months of pushing to go. All right, so that's just the beginning. So what happened with the court case? 5 Venezuelans sued the government, challenging their deportations. They all denied that they were Tren de Aragua members. And so they were not part of the invading army. The Alien Enemies Act didn't apply to them, they argued. One, called JGG, said he is seeking asylum in the US because he fears being killed in Venezuela, where he was arbitrarily imprisoned, beaten and tortured by Venezuelan police. He says the government mistook him for a Tren de Aragua member because of his tattoos. And I hope you don't suffer from deja vu, because you're about to hear that over and over and over again. It is, I'll be repeating myself, it's not going to be deja vu, as I say. But furthermore, the ACLU Council, because the ACLU were the ones who were driving the lawsuit, said the president is invoking the Alien Enemies Act to try to dispense with due process. He wants to bypass any need to provide evidence or to convince a judge that someone's actually a gang member before deporting them. No kidding, hey? Now, the judge's view was, this is Judge James Boasberg, said he didn't really buy the government's use of the Alien Enemies Act. Surprise, surprise. He said the terms invasion and predatory incursion in the law really relate to hostile acts perpetrated by enemy nations. Do you think? The judge then gave them their injunction, the five Venezuelans, to prevent them being deported temporarily under the act. The judge then, when shit started to go down, which we'll be talking about in a second, then decided we need to cut this all down. So he expanded the injunction then to include all non-citizens in US custody, which is where it is right now. He ordered that any flights that had departed with Venezuelan immigrants under the executive order return to the United States, however that's accomplished, whether turning around the plane or not. This is something you need to make sure is complied with immediately, he said. We'll come back to those words soon. So, do you have any comments so far? Okay. What did Trump's team try and do in this scenario? What were they trying to get away with? What was their scheme? What was their plan? And then we'll see how this interacted with the court case. Apparently the White House Deputy Chief of Staff, Steve Miller, the guy who masterminded all this shit, he didn't just come up with the ideas. He came up with the strategy as well. He had a bit of help with Kristi Noem, though, the Department of Homeland Security Secretary. Their plan was to do everything in secret before people found out. But then a government official told Axios, We wanted them on the ground first, trying to deportees, to get them into the El Salvador jail. But the judge could get before a judge could get the case. But this is how it worked out. So they admit they knew that the court was going to be a problem. So they wanted to get the deportees into the El Salvador jail before the judges had a chance to put a hold on them. That's always a great sign, I find, that you're not doing anything dodgy. When you're trying to deport people secretly before the courts can question your actions. That's a sure sign of integrity. So the president secretly signs the executive order on Friday night. On Saturday morning, the signing leaks out. The ACLU immediately tries to preempt in court. The government rushes to deport people quickly. Let's go through a timeline now. 5 p.m., the hearing starts. Judge Boasberg asked the government attorney whether deportations are imminent in the next 24 to 48 hours. The government attorney says he has no idea. The ACLU attorney says he does know and says the US government is very rapidly moving people in planes to El Salvador. I'm sure the government attorney didn't know that, just like they said. 5:22 p.m., Judge Boasberg orders the hearing to take a break so the government attorney can provide the court with official information on what's happening. At 5:26 p.m., first flight departs. At 5:45 p.m., second flight departs. At 6 p.m., the hearing resumes. Okay, so both those flights departed after Boasberg had begun the hearing and was trying to get to the bottom of this, but not before any any judgments had been dispensed with. 6:45 p.m. to 6:52 p.m. Judge Boasberg verbally grants the plaintiff's motions. So he tells the DOJ attorneys that phrase I told you before. You shall inform your clients of this immediately, and that any plane containing these folks that is going to take off or is in the air needs to be returned to the United States. Those people need to be returned to the United States. However that's accomplished, whether by turning around the plane or not embarking those people covered by this on the plane, I leave to you. But this is something that you need to make sure is complied with immediately. At that point, about 6:51 p.m., both flights are off the coast of Yucatan Peninsula. At 7:26 p.m., Judge Boasberg writes his order. Doesn't just say, he writes it down. Doesn't involve the words, any plane containing these folks that is going to take off or is in the air needs to be returned to the United States, though. It doesn't contain the words, this is something you need to make sure is complied with immediately. At 7:37, a third flight departs from Texas, 11 minutes after the written order. It's not yet known whether the third aircraft carried any passengers who were subject to the court's orders. When I say it's not yet known, I don't mean on Saturday. I mean now, a week later, it's still not known because they're screwing the judge around, which we'll get to. 8:02 p.m., the flights arrive in San Salvador. They were sent to a mega prison in El Salvador that houses 40,000 people, where the inmates are confined to cells for 23 and a half hours a day. They sleep on metal bunks with no sheets, pillows or mattresses. They relieve themselves in an open toilet in the middle of the floor. And Trump is paying the El Salvador dictator to keep them in El Salvador prisons, even though pretty much everyone agrees that that is also illegal. In fact, when this was first proposed a month ago, Trump was quoted in the New York Times as saying, if that were legal, I'd do it in a heartbeat. Do you realize how illegal something has to be before Trump says it's illegal? That's really illegal. That is so illegal that Swordfish should have a sequence involving it. Like Trump should just be there typing away going, man, it's so illegal. Oh my God, it's so illegal. Very illegal. Oh yeah. I don't know why the Colonel Sanders was hacking then, but anyway. So, in other words, the first two flights left before the judge's order. The third flight left after the judge's order was both verbally expressed and in writing. During an emergency federal court hearing about whether to enjoin the government from doing something, the government did the very thing that they were there to determine. They did it knowingly, seemingly in order to circumvent the order that they expected the court to issue immediately. Just think about that. But the question is, did they ignore the court order? This is the big question that the next week has been revolving around. Two administration officials insisted to Axios that they had no intention of defying court orders. Quote, "Very important that people understand we are not actively defying court orders," one said. Yeah, it's just that they received the orders. When they received the orders, the planes were over international waters and therefore the ruling did not apply. Apparently, inside the White House, officials discussed whether to order the planes to turn around, but on advice from a team of administration lawyers, the administration pressed ahead. That's all from Axios, okay? All that information. Now, that is bullshit. The law is clear that territorial jurisdiction is not in itself a restriction on the court's ability to place an injunction. You don't even need to know the law to know that that's bullshit. It's just basic common sense. If a court had no reach outside territorial waters, then you could just murder people with impunity when you're flying over international waters. It doesn't make any sense at all, does it? They were in contempt. They were clearly in contempt. Carolyn Levitt, the press secretary, also put out a carefully worded statement. The administration did not refuse to comply with a court order. The order, which had no lawful basis, was issued after terrorist TDA aliens had already been removed from US territory. The written order and the administration's actions do not conflict. Moreover, as the Supreme Court has repeatedly made clear, federal courts generally have no jurisdiction over the president's conduct of foreign affairs. His authorities under the Alien Enemies Act and his core Article 2 powers to remove foreign alien terrorists from US soil and repel a declared invasion. A single judge in a single city cannot direct the movements of an aircraft carrier full of foreign alien terrorists who were physically expelled from US soil. Note she says, the written order, not the order. And so she says the written order and the administration's actions don't conflict. So in other words, she's admitting the verbal order does conflict with the administration's actions. Contempt of court, Judge Boasberg. But she's pretending the verbal order doesn't matter. If you think that wording is an accident where she's pretending the verbal order doesn't matter, you're wrong.
You keep talking about the judge's written order, which hit the docket Saturday night at about 7:26 p.m., but he issued a verbal order before that at about 6:45 and 6:48 p.m. based on the court hearing, a verbal order from the bench. Does the White House feel the need to comply with a verbal order from this judge?
Again, as I said, all of the planes subject to the written order of this judge departed U.S. soil, U.S. territory before the judge's written order.
But what about the verbal order, which of course carries the same legal weight as a written order, and said for the planes to turn around if they were in the air?
There's actually questions about whether a verbal order carries the same weight as a legal order, as a written order, and our lawyers are determined to ask and answer those questions in court.
Yeah, there are questions asked by you and by no one else. There is absolutely no doubt that an order applies whether it's verbal or written. It's still an order from a judge. If a judge tells you to do something and then you say, nah, fuck off, mate, you're going to get done with contempt of court, even if it's not written down. It's ridiculous, this distinction between verbal and written orders. That there, what you just saw, is as good as an admission of contempt, as far as I'm concerned. She also explicitly emphasised that in her view, listening to the court is now optional. She just said the court order has no lawful basis. They might listen to the written order because they're nice guys, but there's no lawful basis. For some reason, She also thinks they're being sent in aircraft carriers. I'll just leave that. But the bottom line is, when you're hiding behind such thin reeds, we're talking millimetre thick reeds here, like the order was verbal or we were over international waters, Your Honour. You're already defying court orders when you're saying shit like that. You're just pretending that you're not defying court orders. What you're doing is keeping up appearances. You're not being brazen about it. You're being finicky and tricky, but you're still defying it. No one is left in any doubt that they are intentionally defying a court order. It's just whether they've come up with a pretext or not. So take note. I'm not finished, but take note. This is a critical moment right now, because once the executive branch decides it doesn't have to follow the law, for even one person, especially one kind of person, it's established that it doesn't have to follow the law for anyone. If you can start cutting corners like this, you're going to pull open the hole you just punched in that paper, and you just keep on pulling at it and pulling at it and pulling at it. Throughout his career, Trump has done this. He tests boundaries, and if allowed to do so, he goes on. What I said before at the pushing. By the way, in the end, just for the numbers, just to be detailed about this, they sent 137 alleged Tren de Aragua members, 101 Venezuelans via standard processes, 21 alleged MS-13 members. That 137 were all clearly violating the court order that they knew about, in my opinion. All right, let's get to the reactions now. Any thoughts, comments, questions so far? No? Just enjoying the ride?
Yep. Tell me the reactions.
The position of Republicans is that the court has no business second-guessing Trump when it comes to national security. You see, they say it's a political question whether there's an invasion or not. They say that courts shouldn't be reviewing that call, that's a president's call to make. Is it an invasion or is it not an invasion? You can't judge that. That's not a legal question. That's a political question. In the legal brief, they put it this way. The determination by the executive of whether there's an invasion is a non-justiciable political question. Now, this is a very dangerous belief, because if that holds, then the president could abuse invasion declarations anytime he wants, and he literally couldn't be stopped, because the courts are the only people who can stop him. So if the courts can't review it, then he can't be stopped. He can just say, you're an invader. And even though you're manifestly not an invader, who's going to say no? It's unreviewable. So that's when we get to our police state again. That is a real important doctrine to not let them get away with. That is genuine dictator stuff right there. But it's a bullshit argument, which I'm glad to say, because there is an enormous amount of precedent working against this. Once again, I will be very disappointed with the Supreme Court if the Supreme Court don't recognise the mountain of precedent about this. Firstly, the text of the Act itself says that judicial review is available to consider whether an alleged enemy alien actually falls within the Act's purview, which is what we're talking about here. Are they a member of the invading army or not? There are cases from the time of the law which back this up. Lockington v. Smith in 1817. That's just around, that's only 20 years after the law was written. So that is contemporaneous. And that is about this. Also, it's been applied hundreds of times by courts in World War I and World War II that judicial review is available to determine whether the detainee was one of the natives, citizens, denizens, or subjects of a country against which Congress has declared war. So once again, were they a member of the relevant group? Huge amount of precedent. Even the one case the government cited, and literally they only cited one, it was Ludicky versus Watkins from 1948. Because in Ludicky versus Watkins, there was one part that they said was beyond judicial review. Not this part, a different part. I won't go into the details. It was whether the war's still going or not, because this was 1948. It was after the war ended. So they're saying, is the war still on? That they left up to the president to decide. But while it stated that judicial review is precluded for at least some questions with the Alien Enemies Act, even in that case, footnote number 17 stated this wasn't one of the questions. Whether the person restrained is in fact an alien enemy 14 years of age or older. That is subject to judicial review according to the only bloody case they cited, the government. But I'll give a hat tip to the judge for that. The judge is the one who pointed that out. So good on you, judge. It's also kind of common sense. I mean, look, I can see how you could potentially make that argument before about that the crime that Trendeagro committee might be a predatory incursion. Maybe. Lots and lots of crime. Maybe. I mean, it's not a good argument, but I could see you kind of making it. It's a hard argument to say that they are hybrid with the Venezuelan government, but let's give it to them. Let's say they got both. Let's say it's a predatory incursion and they're a hybrid government with the Venezuelan government. Okay, fine. All yours, government. There's simply no way you can get away with saying, and we can just label anyone as a member of Trendeagro without being questioned. There's just no way you can say that. No one's going to allow that. No matter how many times you allege they're all rapists and murderers, like they keep on doing. The Attorney General, Pam Bondi, though, is giving it the red-hot go. Tonight, a DC trial judge supported Trendeagro terrorists over the safety of Americans. So she's asserted that they were all guilty without a trial. And she goes on. This order disregards well-established authority regarding President Trump's power, and it puts the public and law enforcement at risk. It puts the public at risk to wait a couple of days before you deport someone who is in detention. Sure. It gets worse.
Yeah, the in detention part is key because they're not out in the community doing crimes.
No,
they're in a jail.
They're in a jail. And no one's trying to bust them out of the jail. And she's not the only one who's trying to run this argument. This is Mike Davis, who's at the centre of every bad argument. Go for it, Mike.
I don't say this lightly. I've never said this. They need to ignore this lawless order. We have our national security on the line. When you have these foreign terrorists who are invading America, they are raping, kidnapping, torturing, and murdering Americans. The president has a constitutional duty as commander-in-chief to get them the hell out of America.
That was restrained. So once again, he's assuming they're all guilty.
And just declaring a judge's order lawless because he doesn't like it.
Yes.
In what way is it lawless? It's literally the law.
Well, he's saying that judges can't. He's one of those people who says judges just can't judge this kind of thing. It's not in their jurisdiction because it's national security. So the government's beyond question. That's his position on the law. Meanwhile, there is a definite change in tone coming from the administration, which is worrying me a lot while this is all happening. Administration staffers, they're suddenly showing a genuine disrespect for the law. Carolyn Levitt, she explicitly said the order had no lawful basis. That's new. She explicitly was saying that they were above the law when it came to these matters. Tom Homan, oh my God, I can't believe 2 weeks ago I gave him a pat on the head. I said, at least he follows the law. I was trying to be nice there. And I said, well, yeah, the guy might be a third-rate thug, but at least he follows the law. This is Tom Homan.
I hate to be this person, but I really did suspect that was going to age poorly.
It's fair enough. I'll take the brickbats. Come on, Tom, hang me.
I wake up every morning loving my job because I work for the greatest president in the history of my life, and we're going to make this country safe again. I'm proud to be a part of this administration. We're not stopping. I don't care what the judges think. I don't care what the left thinks. We're coming.
I don't care what the judges think. Looks like I made a bad call. Judge Boasberg asked for another hearing at 5 p.m. on Monday to work out exactly why the administration didn't carry out his order, like it wasn't obvious. And the DOJ responded by asking him to cancel the hearing because, quote, the government is not prepared to disclose any further national security or operational security details about the deportation flights to plaintiffs or the public. So they're basically telling the judge that the judge that they've already ignored, they've told him not to bother to have a hearing because they're not going to tell him anything. And then they turn around and try and get him removed by the DC Circuit Court of Appeals because they say the government cannot and will not be forced to answer sensitive questions of national security and foreign relations in a rushed posture without orderly briefing and a showing that these questions are somehow material to a live issue. Answering them, especially on the proposed timetable, is flagrantly improper and presents grave risks to the conduct of the government in areas wholly unsuited to micromanagement supervision by a district court judge. So not only are judges not allowed to rule on their assertions, but the judge can't even ask them about it. I don't like where this is going, Melina. Since then, Boasberg got nothing out of them on Monday, of course. He gave them more time. On Wednesday, Pam Bondi said the government is going to invoke state secrets privilege as justification for withholding all information about the flights. Because it's such important national security info, isn't it? The time of flights that already took place. Don't leak those secrets. A DOJ spokesperson said the agency, quote, continues to believe the court's superfluous questioning of sensitive national security information is inappropriate judicial overreach. And then on Thursday, they had another hearing. Boasberg had some pretty basic questions. He needed to know whether to hold the government in contempt about what time the two planes departed from US, their points of departure, what time they left US airspace, when they landed, and when the deportees were transferred out of US custody. They were all his questions. The government's response was filed after the deadline and featured only the sworn declaration of an acting ICE official who did not provide any new information at all. Boasberg called it woefully insufficient. He asked for a briefing by next Tuesday on why the failure to return the planes to the US did not violate his temporary restraining order. Spoiler, it did. He also asked for a declaration from an official with direct involvement in cabinet-level discussions about invoking the state secrets privilege. But the administration is basically refusing to accept oversight from courts anymore, on this issue at least. You can bet your life national security will soon be everything if they get away with this shit. They just go, national security, sorry, can't talk, national security. Sorry, I'm afraid it's over your head, national security. Now, let me ask you, Melina, what's wrong with getting rid of a bunch of murderers and rapists and terrorists? Why is bleeding heart Chaz getting worked up about getting rid of some murderers, rapists and terrorists? Ask Mike Davis, he'll tell you about them. What's wrong with that? I ask you.
I would say without due process, the government doesn't know for sure that they are deporting murderers and rapists and terrorists.
And you don't even have a law degree. Are you listening, Mike Davis? Exactly. The courts will be delighted to help you get rid of murderers and rapists when you prove that they're murderers and rapists. Until then, you're just deporting people who may have done nothing. For example, two people, this is something that Judge Boasberg's found out. Two people were found in the same car as TDA members during a drug bust. They're now in El Salvador. That's the evidence against them, by the way. They were in the same car as TDA members during a drug bust. 4 people were just in the same house as TDA members during a sting, and they tried to escape out the back door. Well, they must be guilty. The fact they tried to escape when some random people jumped in through the windows and doors with guns and body armor. They're in El Salvador too, those 4 people. At one point, the Trump officials argued, this is great, this is good, this is good. You'll like this one. All right. The lack of a criminal record, this is a quote in court. The lack of a criminal record does not indicate they pose a limited threat. The lack of specific information about each individual actually highlights the risk that they pose. It demonstrates they are terrorists with regard to whom we lack a complete profile. Because they have no evidence of them doing anything, that just means you don't know what they've done. That's even scarier. The truth is out there, folks. Send them to El Salvador at once. This is the standard of evidence for a number of these people who are now sent to El Salvador. We're increasingly hearing about individuals as well. We're hearing about the Gustavo Adolfo Aguilera, fuck, I can't say these names. A 27-year-old, my name's Lechadello, a 27-year-old Venezuelan. He's lived with his family in Dallas since December 2023. He had a job installing water pipes on rooftops. In February, he was detained while he was taking trash out of his home. The authorities had been looking for someone else, not for him. But they just saw him taking the trash out. They noticed his tattoos, and then they arrested him. His family says he has nothing to do with the gang, he has no criminal record, and the tattoos have nothing to do with anything to do with gangs. Once again, it seems like the evidence they have most of is tattoos. Another one, Gonzalez Sarabia, crossed the border, was released to seek asylum, arrested because of his tattoos. His sister said he got the tattoo in Dallas because he thought it looked cool, looked nice. It didn't have any other significance. He's not in the gang. Another guy is arrested because of his tattoos. He was working in the arts in Venezuela. He's LGBTQ. His lawyers say his tattoos are benign. He was ready to present evidence that he was not a gang member, but he never got a chance to present evidence because he was disappeared the other day, just before he did. There are about 6 more of these people who have been profiled in news articles. All of them, literally every single one of them, was arrested solely because of their tattoos. I'd love to know what these tattoos are. Like, if you're a tattoo parlor and you're giving these tattoos that get you deported to El Salvador, get ready to get sued, guys, because these tattoos are bad news. You can see how watertight these methods of determining who the real members of Tren de Aragua are, though, from Tom Homan's answer here. They asked him about it. He starts off quite cocky. They ask him for his evidence, and you'll see what happens.
We removed terrorists. That should be a celebration. We removed terrorists from this country, and I stand by what the president did. I support 100%.
To follow up on that, how do you determine whether somebody is a gang member? What criteria do you use?
To various investigations. A lot of the ways we do it, it's law enforcement sensitive. I'm not going to share all that with you, but whether through social media, through the activities, through their criminal records here and abroad. So this was done a very. The review of this issue was at the highest level I've seen, and I think, again, I stand by everything we did this weekend, and I think the president keeping his promise to the American people.
He starts off with his talking points about how they're all terrorists. The reporter goes, how do you know they're terrorists? And then, well, it all gets Homanized. Several of the plaintiffs in the court case even say they're seeking asylum in the United States because of persecution by Tren de Aragua. And ironically, are now trapped in a prison with Tren de Aragua. Then there's another case, and I'm going to continue the other case with Lockie after a white flash and a sting, because we have come to the end of session 1 of PEP 202. Session 2 is going to be a very short session, but we just need to do a little bit. We're about to lose the room. So, Melina, thank you so much. Do you have anything to say, Melina, about anything that I've just said? What are your thoughts about all this stuff?
I'm going to add one fun fact about Judge Boasberg, which you may or may not have been planning to say later on my way out, which is that he's being accused a lot by people on the right at the moment of being a radical left judge.
Yes.
A radical left judge back in law school was housemates and very close friends with one other famously radical left judge, Brett Kavanaugh. So we'll see what he thinks when it gets to the Supreme Court.
Wow. That explains everything. For this judge to be so obviously overreaching in trying to hold the government accountable, he must be drunk. Melina, thank you so much for your time and for your generosity as always. And you have a nice break. We'll speak to you after the break, eh?
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. See you next time.
Stay peppy. Welcome to the other side of the white flash. We are back in the studio for the second part of this exhilarating tale. And Melina has just transformed into Lockie.
Whoa. I feel cool to have previously been a member of the show that shall not be named.
Tell you what, you deserve Melina / Lockie for that extraordinary transformation. You deserve a sting. This is going to be a short Chaz Unleashed with Lockie. I just want to finish this segment.
That's not a long leash that we're unleashed from.
No, it's a very tight leash, this one. This is going to be short. Number one, because not every PEP needs to be 12 hours long. And number two, because the Bulldogs are playing Collingwood in 18 minutes. So this is not going to be long. We finally found a way to shut me up. Just counter-program the Dogs against me. Okay, now let's take a little break in our narrative because I was weaving a complicated tapestry for you, a legal tapestry. But now we're just going to introduce a few extra colours to make it a pretty rainbow tapestry. There is another case that was going on pretty much the same time as this other case, and this has gotten some coverage, not quite as much, but I want to tell you about it. There was a second case. This involved a Dr. Rasha Alawi, a Lebanese national, also a professor at Brown University's medical school. She was a kidney transplant specialist, so she had no trouble getting herself a valid H-1B visa for skilled foreign citizens in specialty occupations. No problems. Her latest visa was issued on March 11, only a few days before the trip. She actually has been in America for 6 years, but she was returning from a family visit back in Lebanon.
Sure.
It was when she returned to the country that she got herself in a bit of strife and she was detained. So what's the problem for Dr. Alawi? The government says they found sympathetic photos and videos of Hezbollah leaders on her cell phone. Now, on one hand, that sounds vague. On the other hand, hey, are we actually dealing with evidence now?
This is a lot better.
This is a refreshing change. Actual evidence.
Yeah.
Tell me about your evidence, government. They said they also found various other Hezbollah militants in the deleted photo folder of her cell phone.
You've got to delete them immediately.
Yeah. See, but when you delete them, you should
go back and delete them.
Yeah, exactly.
Otherwise, you're stuck with them.
You should wipe them. Yeah, exactly.
I say, with all of the photos of various Hezbollah militants I have in my recently deleted.
That's why I've never caught you with any of those photos.
That's true. You haven't.
Because I've been looking. Let me assure you.
Although I suspect that the lack of those photos in my recently deleted is evidence of what was it?
It's evidence that it's more of a concern because it means that we don't know the full extent of your photo keeping. The fact that we haven't actually found any evidence of photo keeping.
You really cannot win, can you?
That's a good callback, Lockie. I like it.
Yeah, jeez.
You should work at the DOJ. Anyway, so they ask her about the photo of Hezbollah leaders and the deleted photos of other Hezbollah militants. She admits to attending the funeral of the recently killed Hezbollah leader, Nasrallah. Like the leader of Hezbollah, she went to his funeral. Now, we need to be fair here. It's not like a funeral, like 6 feet under kind of funeral. It's not like that. It's not like
it wasn't an intimate ceremony.
No, it's not like 6 people at like Arlington with like wearing veils and shit. It's not like that. Go, woo-hoo, and as they lower the coffin.
Yeah.
This was actually in a soccer stadium with tens of thousands of people.
Oh.
So a very different vibe to this funeral. But still, she admitted she went to this funeral. She admitted she knew Hezbollah was a designated terrorist group. But she claimed that she was a fan of Nasrallah's religious teaching, not his politics. There's a quote from her. So I have a lot of WhatsApp groups with families and friends who send them. So I'm a Shia Muslim and he, Nasrallah, is a religious figure. He has a lot of teachings and he's highly regarded in the Shia community. I think if you listen to one of his sermons, you'd know what I mean. He's a religious, spiritual person. As I said, he has very high value. His teachings are about spirituality and morality. Asked if she supported Nasrallah in any way, Alawi initially denies doing so, but later she appears to acknowledge that she did support and admire him from a religious perspective. She also, the photos didn't end there. She also had photos of Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, in her phone. When asked about those photos, she said, it has nothing to do with politics. It's a purely religious thing. He's a very big figure in our community. Okay, once again, it's about the religious thing. When asked why she deleted those photos of the militants 2 days before her arrival, she said she didn't want to give the authorities the perception that she supports Hezbollah and the Ayatollah politically or militarily.
Ooh. If she is what they're saying she is, that's a ballsy bluff.
Yes. So the government's view is that with the discovery of these photographs and videos, Customs questioned Dr. Alawi and determined that her true intentions in the United States could not be determined. As such, Customs cancelled her visa and deemed Dr. Alawi inadmissible to the United States. This is from DHS. This is one of their tweets. A visa is a privilege, not a right. Glorifying and supporting terrorists who kill Americans is ground for visa issuance to be denied. This is common sense security. You know what? I agree. That is common sense security. Now, I don't know how many times I got to tell you I'm a free speech guy. I'm a free speech guy. This kind of stuff doesn't bother me. But I could see why it would bother some people. I can see why people would find her suspicious. I can see why when a government doesn't have to allow you in, they would think this person is a risk. I can understand that. If I was running security, she can come in. But I don't think it's lawless. I don't think it's ridiculous. I don't have contempt for a security person making a decision that they don't want her to have a visa to get in the country. Even though, as many people have mentioned when they hear about this case, that America could do with some kidney specialists. Like that's like she's got useful skills.
Yeah.
But I can understand why security people didn't want to give her a visa.
Is it a common security practice to check the recently deleted photos of someone's phone?
I reckon if you find a recently not deleted photo of Nasrallah, then you might check their deleted photos.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Look,
because I was asking because of, I mean, how scrupulous are they being?
Are they profiling her? You say, maybe. I don't know. I mean, I wasn't there. I'm just saying from these facts.
No.
Yeah, from these facts, I'm just saying that, and from the quotes, you go, yeah, I can see why you think she's dodgy.
Sure.
I can understand it. I don't think that's unreasonable. But here's the thing. I'm not second guessing them wanting to get rid of her. What I'm concerned about is ignoring a court order. Because at 7:18 p.m., Judge Leo Sorokin issued a court order saying she should not be deported without 48 hours notice to him and an explanation of why she was deported. And yet, 41 minutes after that court order, a deporting plane left with Dr. Alawi on board despite the court order. So there's a court order for her to stay, but she was still deported. Now, I want to show you here that I'm not necessarily going to presume that everything security does is dodgy and illegal and a constitutional violation. Because I think the bad faith that we see here in this case is less obvious than the bad faith we saw in the Alien Enemies Act case. The bad faith in that case was very obvious. But in this case, an attorney connected to Alloway tried to reach a CBP a customs officer at the airport by phone, but he couldn't get anyone. Dr. Alloway claims she yelled out for a customs officer, but no one responded. A customs officer filed a sworn declaration saying that no one at the airport learned of the court order. You might go, oh, hang on. How could they possibly not get the order, you might be asking? Well, to be fair, the order was handed down at 7:18 p.m. and Dr. Alloway was at the gate of the plane at 7:20 p.m. 2 minutes. That's not very long.
Cutting it tight.
Yes. So that to be fair, that I think that's probably a reasonable excuse. But then the plane left the gate at 7:43, which is 25 minutes after the order. They should have had time to get the order by then. And the plane actually left at 7:59, that's like 40 minutes later.
Mm.
So 40 minutes after the order was handed down.
Yeah.
So you're going, well, you guys have some pretty shonky processes if you haven't gotten it in 40 minutes.
Mm.
And on the other hand, Sorokin did issue a second court order on Sunday saying there was reason to believe that Customs and Border Protection defied his initial ruling on purpose, saying he followed common practice in this district as it's been for years, and he ordered Customs to respond to serious allegations of the court hearing scheduled for Monday. These allegations, Judge Sorokin said on Sunday, are supported by a detailed and specific timeline in an under oath affidavit filed by an attorney. That hearing has been put off to give counsel more time to prepare. 2 of her lawyers has recently withdrawn from the case, by the way. I'm not saying that means anything, but you just go, oh, yeah, we'll see what happens with that one. Let's just follow that one. My point is that one there, a lot of people are treating that like it's just closed book. Definitely they were defying a court order.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not 100% convinced that they weren't just disorganized.
Sure.
Or their systems were shit. Even 40 minutes, I could see a world in which someone doesn't get a court order in 40 minutes.
Mm.
In which case, that wasn't so bad.
Reception in airports is always a bit dodgy.
Yeah, I'm not going to say that. But what I am going to say, I think we're trying to be hard there. But I'm just saying that there is brazen defiance, and then there is borderline grey area. I'm not sure what's going on here. Let's see more evidence.
Mm-hmm.
I want to see the evidence the judge had when the judge said that there was evidence that they deliberately violated the court order.
Mm.
Like, presumably the judge has got something.
Yeah.
I just don't know what it is. I'd like to know what that is. So,
have there been any egregious excuses for this?
No, because there's been no more development since then. Because because they've got the hearing in a few days. So we know nothing else.
Sure. Okay.
So, but yeah, the reason I told you that is because a lot of people are putting these two cases together. I think this one's different to that one. I think this one is potentially reasonable. There's no world in which the other one is reasonable. Now, let's get back to the other one. Trump, at this point in time, I've barely mentioned. I've just been talking about lawyers, and I've been talking about judges, and I've been talking about El Salvadorians.
And tattoos.
Let's get back to Trump. At this point in time, the whole right-wing media is starting to go to the judge. As soon as the judge starts providing some problems, they're looking up his wife, who was apparently a Hillary donor. They're looking up his past cases. Apparently some Russiagate FBI defendant who was convicted didn't get jail time because of this judge. They're trying to find anything that could suggest bias at all, not mentioning Judge Kavanaugh. That doesn't make any of the articles, funnily enough. At least not from right-wing media. And then Trump escalates. He tweets out the following. This radical left lunatic of a judge, a troublemaker and agitator who was sadly appointed by Barack Hussein Obama, was not elected president. He didn't win the popular vote, by a lot. He didn't win all 7 swing states. He didn't win 2,750 to 525 counties. He didn't win anything I want for many reasons in an overwhelming mandate, but fine, illegal immigration may have been the number one reason for this historic victory. I'm just doing what the voters wanted me to do. This judge, like many of the crooked judges I'm forced to appear before, should be impeached. We don't want vicious, violent, and demented criminals, many of them deranged murderers in our country. Make America great again. Man, he gives that caps lock a workout. Right. Whenever this happens, whenever Trump goes someone, congressional reps, especially when he goes a judge, congressional reps break the land speed record to see who can tweet out their affirmations first, right? Yeah. They love just like, it's like they're swimming like crocodiles through the water, through a river. It's like foam and bubbles and.
I'm imagining one of those Looney Tunes characters who is there 1 second and the next there's them, but in the shape of them, but in dust.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So who won?
Brandon Gill won, Lucky. Brandon Gill, rep, he won. I'll be filing articles of impeachment against activist Judge James Boasberg this week, he says. You're my hero, Brandon. You're my hero. You are so essential to the democratic process. Thank God for you. Who would have filed impeachment articles if you and every other Republican on earth hadn't been there? Who? No one else would have. Note 2 important things at this point, Lockie. Boasberg hasn't even ruled against Trump yet. He hasn't ruled at all. All he was trying to do was enforce an injunction so that he could hold the case.
Of course.
At this point in time, he hasn't said anything's wrong.
No.
He might go, yeah, that's great. They're all rapists and murderers as charged. On your bike to El Salvador, folks, because this is an incursion. He may say that. I don't know. We have no idea.
Wouldn't that be a bizarre turnaround? Yeah.
But they're treating him like he's single-handedly just shut down Trump and he's just taken over. Oh, this is my business now. I'm the president now. He's just simply wanting to have the people in his court stay in the country long enough to be in his court so they can determine whether they should be deported. That's it. That's note 1. Sorry, just before I move on, I just suddenly realized Trump actually called for him being impeached. He literally wants someone to be impeached for not being a rubber stamp.
Oh, he does too.
Yeah, he does. Anyway, also, no.
Good pickup.
There's a lot of whinging going on about super partisan judges, or as Trump calls them, radical left lunatics, troublemakers and agitators. Yeah. I read a study from Adam Bonica from Stanford. He's crunched the numbers. Since Trump has taken over in his second term, 84% of liberal judges are ruling against him. 86% of centrist judges are ruling against him.
Oh.
And 82% of conservative judges are ruling against him. It's not partisan. The judges are just all ruling against him.
Yeah.
Trump breaks a lot of laws, as it turns out. So just note those 2 things. It is not a partisan conspiracy, and the judge hasn't actually done anything yet. But Justice John Roberts then weighed in with a very short statement. For more than 2 centuries, it's been established that impeachment is not an appropriate response to disagreement concerning a judicial decision. The normal appellate review process exists for that process. He's saying if you disagree with a ruling, you don't impeach the guy, you just appeal it. Impeaching is supposed to be for people who have committed high crimes and misdemeanors.
Yeah.
Yeah, or treason or something like that. Now, to be fair, Trump was relatively diplomatic to John Roberts. No, I'm not being sarcastic here. He was relatively diplomatic in response.
It was more than two centuries. We understood that essentially impeachment was for very rare circumstances and not an appropriate response to rulings you disagree with. What's your reaction to the courts stepping in to make a statement here? They didn't make a statement when Joe Biden decided to forgive all those student loans.
Well, he didn't mention my name in the statement. I just saw it quickly. He didn't mention my name, but many people have called for his impeachment, the impeachment of this judge. I don't know who the judge is, but he's radical left. He was Obama appointed.
Sounds like he knows who he is.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm glad you picked that up. I don't know who he is, but he's radical left.
And Obama appointed.
Yeah. I think he does know who he is. Yeah. Or maybe he's not radical left. This might surprise you. I don't like John Roberts making that statement. Like it's been treated by a lot of people like it's awesome, that statement. And I agree with the statement. I agree with it completely. Like John Roberts saying, dude, if you don't like his judgment, then why don't you just appeal it rather than impeaching the guy? I agree with that 100%. But I don't think it's a good idea for John Roberts to be making those kinds of statements. Number one, it's kind of none of his business. Now you go, huh? Why is it none of his business? Well, impeachments, they're Congress's bag. John Roberts doesn't impeach anyone. He's a judge. Judges don't impeach people. Congress impeaches people. On what grounds can Congress impeach people? On whatever the hell grounds they want. It's Congress. They can impeach you because they don't like the way you sneeze.
Really?
Yeah, they can impeach you for any reason they like. It says high crimes and misdemeanors. That has no definition. It can be anything. So, you know what? If they want to impeach the guy, bugger off, John Roberts. Like, it's got nothing to do with you. Like, this has nothing to do with you at all. And it's particularly, I once again, let me emphasize, I agree with him. He's been sensible. But, yeah, isn't it a bit cheeky for John Roberts to give us a huge song and dance in 2024 in the immunity case about how the courts mustn't second-guess anything Trump does that's even loosely connected to his constitutional powers? And he turns around and tells Congress who they should impeach and why. That's congressional powers, mate. Like, pick your poison, dude. Either people can hold political figures accountable for their decisions, or they can't. You picked the second lane last year. Now you're picking the first lane. So I don't like it. And I particularly don't like it because Trump could get impeached for this exact, like this moment. We might be at the beginning of a series of conduct that is going to get Trump impeached if the Democrats take Congress in 2026.
Yes.
Like, because this court case is going to go on for a while.
Yeah.
And, yeah, we'll get to what I think is going to happen. But Trump could be doing some bad things, and it might get him impeached. And then, you know who presides over the impeachment trial? John Roberts. John Roberts. So should John Roberts be talking about what his view about what's going on before he is presiding over the impeachment trial of a guy who we all know the first thing they do is attack the judge for partisanship whenever he's being held accountable? I just think this is not. John Roberts, what he's saying is obviously sensible and makes sense. I agree completely, but it's good advice. But I don't think he's thought this one through at all. I think he gets a bit defensive of the judges. I understand why he is, but I think this was a bad move from him. Anyway, let's leave him aside. Trump obviously is going for something here because he's starting to escalate with tweets and he's trying to turn up the pressure. What's he going for? And this is getting towards my conclusion. It's pretty clear the government wants this fight. They think the narrative of them fighting the elite and the left to stop the murderers and rapists, they think that's a winning message. It probably is a winning message. I mean, let's face it, immigration is Trump's strongest issue right now.
It is popular.
Yeah, like it's genuinely popular. He's won lots of credits by controlling the border. You can understand him try and make everything about immigration. I can understand that. And the government's social media accounts, they're going nuts, amplifying horrible shit like this. It's like a Travis Scott music video with less grills. Jesus, what are they doing? That was on the White House social media account.
Wow.
But if you think that's bad, look at the next one. This is also from the White House the social media account.
Closing time. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. I know who I want to take me home.
For those listening, they got some of these deportees in chains when they're saying it's closing time, and when they say "I know who I want to take me home," you're seeing them walking in the background with a border patrol sign in the foreground. So, like, you approve that one, Lockie?
I approve of the comedic editing and use of song lyric. I do not approve of the content.
No, that's okay.
Its utilization.
That's all right.
But I respect a good edit where I see one.
Fair enough. Look, we'll give props to
also semisonic.
To that, yeah, I know semisonic.
I know, but it's nice.
We'll give props to their creativity
and their choice of song,
but we won't give props to their personality.
No.
If Twitter does reveal your real personality, I'm not sure the White House's Twitter team is saying good things about them. But anyway, these narrative wins that they're going for on social media, they come at a cost. These guys are riling up a lot of people to think that the courts are out of control and against democracy. Even though the judge has not made any ruling, has done nothing wrong. It is so irresponsible from Trump. But, okay, so in conclusion, my concern is it seems obvious to me that Trump is setting things up here with this incessant escalation. This is going somewhere.
Yeah.
And where it's going is him making people believe the courts are corrupt and they're getting away. And he needs to start ignoring them.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's going to be far off. This is only 2 months in. It's not going to be far off.
Till people believe that or till he tries to get to that point?
Both. And then that is the last shred of constitutional protection from Trump's whims. Gone. And also a massive crisis. The biggest crisis of the last decade, at least. At least. If Trump starts ignoring courts, that's a huge crisis. And, that won't be the end of it either. Do you think it ends there? No. Because the next step is to extend that mindset to citizens. He can say, this horrible invasion that's going on, this war that needs to be taken seriously, this needs martial law.
Oh.
Because of the war. He can declare martial law under the Insurrection Act. He can declare there's an insurrection. Because these invaders, they're trying to overthrow the government. Insurrection. Martial law. Let's go. And if you think those two outcomes are unlikely, then let me remind you, it's only been 2 months and we are already declaring fake wars. And those fake wars that we're declaring aren't even the biggest problem with the court cases at this point in time. I just spent the last hour taking you through a scenario where I barely touched on the fact that there's no flipping war because we're focused on the fact that the fake soldiers in the fake army from this fake war aren't even allowed to sit for a trial before they get messed with. That's much more of an outrage than the fake war.
Yeah.
But the fake war by itself is bad enough.
Yeah.
And that's where we're at after 2 months. So you tell me that in the next 46, he's not going to take the step, that tiny extra step to overtly define court orders. It's just another millimeter. You tell me in the next 46 months, if he's declaring fake wars, why wouldn't he start declaring fake insurrections? It's just the same shit. And the same courts are going to say, well, the same Republicans are going to say the courts can't adjudicate it. And the same Republican courts will be happy to rubber stamp it.
Right.
That's where we're going to be in, is it 3 months? Is it 2 years? Is it 3 years? That's where we're going to be. So get ready. I don't like to be this depressing, but this was a bad week, folks. This was a real bad week. You got to call them when you see them. Should we go and watch the footy?
Yeah, I think let's go watch the footy.
Thanks so much, folks, for hanging with me to the end of that one. We've got 2 more PEPs. Well, 1 PEP and 1 PEEP. We have a PEEP. I think I'm recording on Monday, so you'll get that on either Monday or Tuesday. And that is with another pepper. Another pepper. I'm very excited about this one. This is going to be a good one. And our final PEP for the first session of 2025 is with Dr. Dave. It's going to come out next Friday, and then I'm going to take 2 weeks off before the next PEP after that, and we will see you then.
A well-earned break.
Yeah, I did. I've got no legs left. I'm not even crawling. I'm slithering like a snake to the line. I've got nothing left.
Yeah, let's get you to the footy, man.
Yeah, okay. See you guys in a few days' time. Till then, stay peppy.